tall man looks down from above and says that she was hired, but Nomi cannot even raise her eyes. She just stands, cries, and tries to understand what it all means when her head starts spinning, she cannot believe her luck and tries to recall exactly how her life ended up in this crazy place. Complete silence in her memory, so she takes a deep breath to calm down at least a little. She tells herself, hold on, and slowly begins to get acquainted, says her name, but at the end. Her name is Nomi. Tears flow down her cheeks. She is trembling from shock, but to understand why she is here, one must look back. A little earlier, the scene shifts to Dasadasa village, a small place in the very heart of the Dwarven Kingdom, wherein an old man lies at home. He calls someone and says he has one last thing to say before it becomes too late and reaches out to grab Nomi's hands. He speaks the truth. She is not truly a pure dwarf like everyone in the village, and this completely throws her off track. Nomi begins to panic and asks if this means she is not really his daughter and her father is just lying in bed and looking exhausted, but he stops her right there. He swears she is definitely his child and explains, since she is only half-dwarf, she is a half-dwarf, and this leaves. Nomi just stands still, completely shocked. She replays the words half-breed in her head, and only now does the secret nature finally reach her. Everything starts to come together for Nomi. She thinks that most dwarves have brown hair, but hers has always been bright blonde. She looks at her own reflection and realizes, even her body is not like the other gnomes, and finally understands that she truly from another race. Her father explains, it was never really important to him who her mother was, so he does not know all the details, but he thinks that she could have been a gnome with light brown hair the same as hers. Nomi listens as her jade begins to drift away. He says her mother came to take him, but Nomi panics and will beg just to endure a little longer until his hand went limp. She loses him, screams with her voice, calls again and again, but he is already gone. It gets even worse when the village head appears at the doorstep. He finds out that her father died and immediately orders her to leave the house by morning. Nomi panics and asks what will happen to her next, but the man gives her no drop of sympathy because he does not care. He says the village tolerated her for so long only because her father was still alive, and now he makes it clear they no longer want to see her in their village, the ugly half-blood. The village head repeatedly lashes out at Nomi, mocks her light hair and how she looks, points out supposedly she doesn't even look like a dwarf, calls her disgusting, and methodically crushes her feelings to the end. Nomi, through tears, tries to stand up and defend herself, begs, leave her alone because she can still do her job. But he does not hear a word. He grabs her by the hand and orders her to shut up and stop whining, demands she pack her things and do it immediately. The man actually throws her out of the house onto the ground, threatening that he will expose her all the way to the surface world if she does not leave, and leaves, leaving Nomi to sit there alone in the dark, completely shattered by everything that had just happened. She goes to say goodbye to her father for the last time and hears confirmation. She is officially being expelled from the village. Nomi looks utterly broken when she tells him to at least have a good time with her mother on the other side, and then she begins to leave with only a small bag in her hands and cannot understand what to do with her life next. When she tries to leave unnoticed, she catches an angry villager laughing, as if the chief finally got rid of this annoying trouble. Nomi looks back one last time and realizes the village elder and everyone else really just threw her out as if she meant nothing. The village head approaches a couple of his supporters and, as if in one breath, announces he has great news for them. One of the guys looks around and sharply asks if they are now definitely allowed to live in this house. The chief confirms without any hesitation. He finally freed the place for his son and his wife. The villager sounds a bit surprised and asks again if that house did not belong to Nomi's family for generations, but the elder does not even raise an eyebrow. He directly states that they no longer need any non-gnomes near their village. Nearby, some woman looks uncertain and quietly mutters to herself whether that man will hold a grudge and try to bite with spite, especially since he was constantly messing around with those strange machines and all sorts of devices. The chief just laughs and looks away, folding his arms across his chest, and asks what such a miserable puppy can do. He tells her there is no reason to worry because as soon as they are driven to the surface, direct sunlight becomes practically a death sentence for the gnome. He continues, even if the sun doesn't kill him, the forest giant boars will definitely destroy him just like they did with his father. Nomi slips away, hides in the bushes, and trembles with fear when she hears him say her family has no other choice but to die somewhere in a ditch. The chief simply rubs his chin and grumbles that the father and son always annoyed him with their questions about how he does everything, so he considers This is just a good way to get rid of problems. The village head gets excited. He shares the news with his buddies and declares that they need to celebrate the half-blood and her family have finally disappeared. He demands a toast to good news and Nomi hears every word. She stands in the shadows, clutching her clothes and trying to pull herself together while they giggle right above her. She doesn't break, she makes a move, reaches forward stubborn to take what is hers and escape this place forever. You start with the essentials. She packs work tools and clothes, along with magical stones and remnants of materials they left behind. She shakes with shock. All of this fits so easily. The thought spins in her head that her mother's old bag is simply incredible if it holds all this. Even her handmade crafts, accessories, and all the small souvenirs she couldn't leave behind, now that she has gathered everything. She sneaks through the village under the cover of night, finds a cart, and begins to climb inside so as to keep quiet and so no one sees her. As soon as she hides, she pulls a white sheet over herself to avoid giving herself away, and whispers that she has finally put Lee. Exhaling with relief, she simply rejoices. She actually managed to get on the wagon and none of the other gnomes caught her. She freezes in her hiding place and looks outside, realizing she has no idea where this cart is really going, but right now any direction is better than staying here. In the hiding place at the back of the cart, Noma hopes that he is going to his mother's homeland. She thinks, if she gets there, maybe people will no longer call her ugly. The moon is high in the sky while the cart continues rolling through the quiet night and suddenly the guard's voice breaks the silence. He says they have reached Loserville 1-3. He informs the driver they can go further and Noma cannot believe her ears. To hear a common language and Noma finally feels that descent is behind her. She is on the surface. She understands that she must immediately break away before they go any further. She crouches, holds for a moment, and decides. The cart is moving slowly enough for her to have time to jump, so she rushes forward but immediately loses her balance. She breaks the silence with a scream as she falls right behind, hitting the ground with all her might. Low. Lying on the ground and completely dazed, silently telling herself this must be a nightmare, and then it sounds. A memory of her father flickers in her mind. She hears him say she needs to find a way to be happy even when she is a half-dwarf. She reaches out into the void, calls him to wait, but the vision fades and suddenly she realizes she is standing in a completely different world. She becomes aware that she is late and orders herself she must get to work immediately. Nomi begins to recall her old life, those times when work never ended, and she can't even remember the last time she truly got a good night's sleep because her head suddenly throbs with a sharp pulsating pain and everything comes back to her right now. Turned out she actually died from exhaustion and was reborn in this new world. And she finally comes to the conclusion she is not an ordinary dwarf, she is a half-dwarf. Transforming from a corporate slave in Japan into a blonde in a fantasy world is too much to digest at once. Then also, sh. And then she suddenly breaks free from her thoughts and sees something that knocks her off her feet, completely unexpectedly, all the way to Ma. A gigantic man with fangs gaze looms over her. He calls her miss and says he is glad she woke up, but Nomi completely loses control. Her head spins. Could she be in hell because there stands a real ogre? She begins to panic and whispers to herself that this will never end. She's not going to stand still and remain calm while this monster devours her. The ogre tries to keep Nomi still and mutters for her to calm down if she keeps struggling and thrashing like this. She only shudders and screams in pain, while the ogre just sighs and says he warned her. At that moment, a man in uniform enters the door and solemnly declares that treating her wounds is the top priority task. Ogre immediately agrees he will take care of it. Nomi feels how excessive anxiety finally begins to recede, but she still seems completely disconnected from reality. She looks around and tries to understand where she even is. It is then that she notices an incredibly beautiful woman with a monocle, and freezes, looking in admiration, thinking how beautiful she is until she notices that the woman has huge black horns. Another moment of shock and she is completely overwhelmed by panic. Ogre looks at her and asks if she can even understand this. He cannot fathom how she manages to speak the language of the dwarves. Nomi clarifies everything and states she is definitely not a dwarf. She says that dwarves are fairies and that she simply understands him normally. Golem exhales. This is an incredible relief. He explains that they found her unconscious and with blood flowing from hair in the roadside, and he leads her to the corner. He will make her understand. The person standing there is exactly the one who really saved her. The horned woman orders Nomi not to move, just a moment more and she will heal her. She begins a spell and commands the girl to just endure it because the sensation will pass in a second. When the light goes out, Nomi suddenly realizes she once really did put magic into stones when polishing them, but the fact that it can heal her wound like this is happening for the first time. She is completely stunned by the magic. The horned woman asks if this is really her first time being healed by magic. Nomi just sits and sorts through her thoughts, not really sure what to answer. Looking at her, the woman notices Nomi is only about 140 cm tall, and she thinks that not knowing magic is completely normal if this child is almost a dwarf. Gorobachka connects and declares that her face and hair look nothing like those of an ordinary gnome. Nomi looks up and does not understand where he is leaning. Nomi finally admits she is a half-gnome, and the thought overwhelms her like a wave. Even other races already see that she does not belong. She lowers her gaze, feeling slightly uncomfortable with her own identity. The horned woman absorbs this silently and immediately changes the subject. She asks, "Nomi, what did you work as before you ended up here?" Nomi is caught off guard by the question. She stumbles over the word and exhales that it is indeed quite sudden to ask like this while she is still recovering. She explains that she used to mine ore at home and then adds, she also worked as a seamstress. And the woman with horns freezes right there and asks to repeat what was last said. Nomi is a bit nervous and quietly says once more, she is a master. The horned woman points her finger to the right towards Nomi and laughs that she was officially hired, and behind her a child immediately starts panicking. Nomi stammers, stunned, exclaims in surprise. Could it be that she is really being hired right here on the spot? Her expression is confused, completely embarrassed. Grrr, the bear takes a step forward and orders the woman to slow down. One must not make assumptions about her condition, she might simply be lost. Nomi lowers her gaze and quietly admits that she has no friends, she is alone. She walks away, leaving the ogre standing in awkward silence. And that is all the horned mistress has to hear while she screams again that she was hired, and the giant man-eater tries to make her calm down. Ogre says that hiring someone solely based on their past work without knowing their deal is madness, but the woman with horns crosses her arms and cuts him off mid-sentence, not letting him utter a sound. There is no more time to take this lightly. She, looking as if she is about to break, says that lantern graveyards will simply continue to multiply, and that they need to stop it right now. Nomi catches her strange phrase and asks if she really just said lantern graveyard because she sits and wonders how a graveyard for lanterns even works if lanterns are not living beings. The horned woman leans closer, points at Nomi, and says that she looks completely confused. Nomi can only nervously nod as if agreeing. The woman, gathering her thoughts, decides to lay everything out clearly and explain the situation, and because of this, the little girl calms down a bit. First, she talks about the current state of the demon kingdom, but the explanation becomes very strange when she suddenly says that they simply buy new lanterns as soon as their magical stones run out. Nomi just stands frozen in shock, unable to look away from the very mention of the demon kingdom. It turns out this country is full of wizards, the Majin race, and stands right on a mountain filled with energy. In fact, they are the biggest buyers of everything the gnomes make, but Nomi got stuck on this story about the lantern and, asking if she heard correctly, kept clarifying. They replaced the entire module completely. Then she asks why they don't just exchange the magic stone, and the woman with horns admits, makes sense. But as soon as that was said, Nomi shouts that no one in the entire Demon Lord Castle actually knows how to do such a simple repair job. The horned woman clutches her chest and honestly admits they did everything they could handle with this, and then she is overwhelmed by pure frustration and she just groans. She has explained how those lanterns are constructed. They can't be opened even from below, and even if someone breaks the glass to get to the magic stone, that is all a lost cause, trash, not an option. Nothing will save it anymore and it will never light up again. Nomi silently looks at her, completely confused, and asks if replacing the magic stone really has to be so complicated. And the ogre cannibal grabs her and the horned woman just lets out that piercing squeal. She got so upset. The woman leans forward anxiously, fearfully staring at Nomi, and asks if repair is some secret technique known only to dwarves. As soon as she hears no, Nomi flinches. She starts shaking the poor girl and screams that the merchant gnomes took this as an excuse to hike prices. She yells that their entire national treasury is literally being drained to the last thread by those greedy bastards. Nomi chokes back tears and apologizes, admitting her people behaved too harshly. She is truly very sorry for all the problems they caused. The woman with horns finally exhales, calms down, straightens up, and simply says she understands the situation. The horned woman leans closer and throws a sharp glance, addressing Nomi. She just needs to accept their offer. She explains that she is being set up right now. They will give her a high position and make her the official chief craftsman for the entire demon kingdom. Meanwhile, the woman asks if there are any objections, but she addresses only the Lord of Demons, and Nomi is completely overwhelmed, so much that it takes her breath away. Asp. Especially because Nomi can only stammeringly ask if he is really the Lord of Demons, while the man makes a heavy step toward her. The tall man shows his true face with massive horns standing in place, and an incredibly dark and serious aura spreading around. Nomi has completely lost control, her thoughts scatter in total chaos, and she herself is about to faint from shock. She feels as if a predator is hunting her, and she bursts into tears, convinced that she will be killed right here and now. But suddenly Nomi freezes for a moment, and her gaze empties. She realizes the pressure of the situation is such that she can no longer cope. The Lord of Demons stares at her with one burning eye and says that she is officially hired. He asks if she has any problems with that. Nomi shouts yes, too afraid to say otherwise, though secretly wondering if her life will finally be alright. Medes suddenly realizes that they haven't even properly met yet, so she tells Nomi, just call her Medes, although she, by the way, is the prime minister of the entire country. And just then Sigru abruptly interrupts the scene, throwing out, for him a true pleasure to meet, although it turns out he is the highest ranking among the 4 heavenly kings. Two have just warmed up and loudly proclaim that the man standing right here is the true king of the entire country. Revealing in him the Lord of Demons, Magicalia, he just stands still and looks incredibly serious while the weight of his title settles on everyone around. Nomi begins to lose her balance because she is surrounded by the Prime Minister, the Heavenly King, and the Lord of Demons, as if a solid hail of crazy titles is pouring down on her all at once. She feels completely out of place and asks herself if this is even normal, but still keeps the introduction simple. She only introduces herself as Nomi. This makes the Lord of Demons freeze. He realizes she doesn't even have a surname, so he decides to settle the matter right here and now. He tells her that she will inherit the name of the former Chief Master, Razmed de Verger, and by this gives her a true identity in this new world. Nomi only convulsively squeezes out, "Thank you," still completely stunned by how quickly everything is happening. She looks away, barely blushes, and tries to convince herself the new name and high position are by no means such a bad deal. Nomi still can't recover. Once she was completely lost, and now she was sent to work as a crafter, and she can't believe that she was given such a high-class name. Medes decides it's time to get to work and tells her she needs to go and see what condition the castle is in now. Sigres replies that he is up for it, so he goes too, and Nomi, trying not to fall behind, picks up the plan and agrees. The Lord of Demons tries to join, but Medes immediately stops him, reminds him of the mountain of papers still waiting. Because of this, he behaves as if he has been treated completely unfairly. While they bustle back and forth, Nomi suddenly clarifies the obvious for herself. She has definitely figured out who really rules the castle. Just as they were ready to set off, one of the guards in uniform calls Nomi in a voice that involuntarily draws her gaze, thereby leaving her with one. She freezes in amazement. Right before her eyes, the guard extends his hand and hands her a folded scrap of white fabric. Nomi takes it and immediately understands. It is her gnome hat, the very thing she always used to hide her identity at home. The guard explains they found the hat lying nearby while she was unconscious and just wanted to make sure it was hers. So, Nomi says that it is, but what shocks her most is something else. Even when she took off the hat, no one said a word about her hair. Sigrai stands up, quickly glances at Nomi and sees something is wrong with her. "Are you still in pain?" he asks. Sigrai suggests going for Medes to call for help, but Nomi waves him off without hesitation. It's not because of them. She lowers her gaze and quietly explains that her dad was, essentially, the only person who ever saw her without the hat. And going without it, that's just too strange, her voice sounds. Sigrai falls silent for a moment, processes her words, then recalls what he heard. Gnomes usually keep their heads covered, almost always, usually so. So he looks at Nomi and voices the conclusion, "No pressure, there's no need to wear it if you really don't want any more." Medes shifts his gaze directly into her eyes and says that it's absolutely no problem if she wants to leave it off. They don't stop and show that her hair is actually just incredible at F. Hiding this under a hat is sheer futility, a thought even the Lord of Demons agrees with and echoes. From all this keeping face, Nomi bursts into a bright blush. She is holding back tears with all her might. Sigres asks if she is okay. Nomi swears that everything is fine, it's just that everyone is too kind to her and it hurts because of that. When everything is settled, Meads looks ahead and officially introduces the girl with her new high-class title, Nomi Lasmaid Diverger. Nomi felt a wave of relief wash over her and thought, maybe she really did not come here in vain. As they walk through the castle corridors, Meads explains that Nomi's main task is to watch over and repair all the products and shop work throughout the building. But she tells the girl that monitoring the overall progress of the work is now her responsibility, and Nomi nervously agrees as they go deeper inside. Meads moved on to the best part and named the pay. She said that every week on Eagle Day she would receive 2 gold coins. Just the thought of such money makes Nomi dizzy. She cannot believe the payment is so large and asks if she is imagining it. Meads adjusts her glasses and keeps a perfectly professional tone, saying that everyone who truly works should receive fair pay. For Nomi, this is a real blow. In her village, even when she and her father worked themselves to exhaustion, they did not earn half of this, and now as they continue walking through quiet, muted corridors, Nomi begins to clearly feel something is wrong with the very atmosphere here. She glanced at Meads and showed that there seemed to be catastrophically few lanterns in the castle, and this completely threw the Prime Minister off track. Meads asks how she can even notice this, and Nomi replies that even with her dwarf night vision, it is still too dark in these corridors. Meads admits that complaints have just poured in from all sides. It is too dark here, so she explains the current distance between the lanterns is the maximum they are capable of now. The Prime Minister says there are a few other options, but quickly dismisses them, and then a loud noise from the wall makes both flinch. Meads completely loses her composure and screams that her precious lantern has been damaged. She is clearly on edge because of this, but Nomi remains calm and reaches for her equipment. It is clear they have already replaced the broken lantern with the one she brought. She carefully places her lantern in the wall bracket, checks that everything is securely fastened, and prepares it for activation. When the corridor clears, Meads is captivated by the glow and notices the light from it feels completely different, strange, mysterious. Nomi tells her that everything works from a thing called the Dawn Stone. She explains, although the light is not very bright, it travels a very long distance, leaving. Meeting Meads completely stunned her. She cannot believe that such a device really exists in this world. While Meads is still processing the shock, Nomi crouches and says it is time to reveal everything and get to work. Nomi understands she cannot just let a high-ranking official Lady Meads sit on the cold floor, so Then Nomi shouts at the top of her voice, calls the Prime Minister to get his attention while she rummages through her gear. She suddenly grabs a huge pillow with a floral pattern and shocks the carnivores, who cannot believe she had such a thing with her. Nomi gladly invites Lady Meads to sit, but she is much more interested in how exactly that bag works. So Nomi simply explains, it is incredibly convenient because it is full of everything, and the carnivores remain completely baffled. So Nomi returns to business and picks up the broken lantern to take a closer look. She begins to unscrew the top, opening the casing to peek inside, and as soon as the parts scatter, she immediately understands everything. Nomi notices a pile of white powder falling from somewhere, so the matey quickly start asking what that thing really is. Nomi says it is just magical stone powder. Once those stones run out of energy, they become incredibly fragile and crumble. While examining the parts, Nomi concludes, the whole lantern is a complete shoddy job and it definitely won't do for the castle. Nomi explains, as soon as the magical dust from the stone gets on the board, it causes poor contact. Meaty says he understands, so no. But Nomi confidently tells the Prime Minister that this is actually a simple fix, she will handle it in a moment. She reaches the work and wipes the dust off the base, wondering if the stone she holds in her hands is still usable after polishing. Meaty silently watches the work, thinking to herself that Nomi's skills are actually quite remarkable, which forces Nomi to pretend she is shy and tells her that everything she does is actually nothing special. Nomi explains that the stone can be reused, it just needs to be repolished, and the magical tincture will prevent it from crumbling. Meaty almost freezes with delight, it shines like new, but Nomi only says it needs to stand a little longer than she. Then she puts the stone back on the board and carefully begins to connect all the internal wires. The lantern suddenly flickers with bright light, it is clear that everything finally worked, and Nomi Bagato awkwardly says that it is supposed to look exactly like that, and then suggests first going to finish the rest of the street lamps. Meaty froze as if rooted to the spot, stunned to the edge, and whispers Nomi's new name as if she cannot believe it happened. And then she crashes right into Nomi, laughing and shouting that it is incredible how quickly she fixed the problem. Nomi begins to cry and tries to ease the tension, insisting that she is still half dwarf, so she should be capable of that. Medi says that the gnomes themselves caused their treasury crisis from the start, so Nomi is amazed and Medi immediately picks up. Nomi has the same talent that ordinary people simply do not have. Nomi just looks at Medi's while she tries to brush off modestly and says to her, "Stop, just accept this compliment." Medi's finally gives her a genuine smile and thanks her for the help. And from this, Nomi involuntarily remembers the village where everyone constantly considered her a complete weirdo. She was always called a burden, and only her father had something good for her. Nomi lowers her gaze and thinks that she is still a little nervous and lacks confidence, but she is already beginning to feel everything is gradually changing. Nomi is overwhelmed with emotions and shouts how much she wants to be useful. She is so happy that she can finally help with something Gand. And Medes tells her that this is exactly what she likes to hear. She replies, it's time to move to their main location, so they start walking. Nomi thinks to herself that the repair work itself should not be any problem, and hope begins to awaken in her. Maybe, after all, she really has what it takes to survive in the Demon Lord's castle. Finally, they stop in front of huge doors and Medes lets her know they have finally arrived. Medes opens the door with a wave of her hand and tells Nomi that this is exactly the place she was talking about. Nomi looks inside and there is complete darkness. She cannot help but notice not a single sign of light. While she gazes at the rows and the roses of old lamps on the shelves, Nomi nervously asks if this is, by any chance, not a lantern graveyard. Vidai stands beside her and addresses her by her full inherited name, Nomi Lasmi Diverger. Hesh throws her a stern look and tells Nomi that her job is to return all these lanterns, one by one, to working condition. Nomi's face turns completely pale and she already thinks disgustedly, maybe the Demon Lord's castle is not just a giant sweatshop. She begins to panic because there is much more work here than she ever promised herself. She looks at the endless rows of broken lanterns and wonders if this is really happening. She already imagines how they will lock her forever in this dark room and force her to work non-stop at the desk. And gets stuck in a change that never ends while she tries to fix all these things herself. So she clutches her head and seems to lose herself, hesitating whether this place is really as terrible as the horror stories claim. Medes just stands and watches as everything cracks and falls apart, then calmly asks if there is any problem, and then she casts a serious look and calls Nomi's full name to get her attention. Nomi tries to brush it off with laughter and says that it's just a bunch of stuff, admitting that she is already counting how many sleepless nights she will need and this leads to. Medes looks quite puzzled and she asks Nomi directly what exactly she means. Medes explains that the main goal was to show Nomi what everything really looks like around the castle, but seeing how nervous the child is, Medes moves closer and says she feels sorry for how quickly and strongly she pressured her. Nomi starts wildly waving her hands and insists that it is not a problem at all. She brushes it off with laughter, admitting that she just can't get rid of that old corporate slave mindset and she is even ashamed because of it. And then she begins to bow and apologize for the big misunderstanding, and Medes just looks at her and says that he understands everything. Medes decides that it's time to return and says that Sigrise will soon appear to finish the tour. Before leaving, she tells Nomi, take whatever you want and look around the room. Nomi speeds up to the maximum and shouts thanks to Lord Medes as the woman starts to walk away, but then Medes pauses for a moment, lets out a slight smile, and tells Nomi that she is really counting on her. She looks back one last time and addresses her by her official title, Chief Crafting Officer. Nomi watches as Midi walks away and shouts that she will do everything she is capable of. She takes one deep breath as soon as she is left alone and admits to herself this job is truly a huge responsibility. She is very pleased that the Medes trust her enough to leave the work in her hands, and after that she raises her fist up, gets fired up, and finally gets down to the task. The girl looked up at these gigantic shelves and suddenly realized the work waiting for her there is simply incredible in amount. Carefully looking into the piles, she estimates, if she hadn't come, would they have continued to multiply endlessly? She thinks that she will sort everything out later as it should be, but for now she takes one thing and decides this will do. While she examines the lantern, the very things Midi told her about come to mind, what they were like. She remembers the bottom did not open, so she had to break the glass to get the old magical stone. Even when she inserted a new stone inside, the lantern did not light up, and the thought troubles her. Maybe that was how it really was. Nomi stares at the lantern, her chin is covered by her palm and her gaze tries to understand what is really going on here. She decides to start with the bottom cover, look at it first to check if it might hide any clue. She opens it and her eyes widen sharply. as if her brain hasn't yet managed to understand what exactly she is seeing. But before Nomi can comprehend anything, Sigri abruptly opens the door and apologizes for making her wait. Nomi flinched and jumped slightly, then turned around surprised to find Sigro appeared from nowhere. They walk side by side through the corridors, and Sigri asks if Nomi liked that lantern cemetery. Nomi admits that everything here was much more intense than she could have imagined. Sigri barely noticeably begins to long for the past and recalls how it was before, when the old man was still around. It seems that guy fixed everything himself, complaining nonstop the whole way. Nomi looks around and mutters that it's complete nonsense, for such a cool castle to be so dark inside. Sigri's looked down at Nomi and said he heard the truth. It turns out the dwarves helped build the castle. He continues walking, muttering to himself that dwarves are true masters of craft and that his people would never have managed this achievement. Nomi looked away and quietly agreed, but a doubt in her own words already resonated in her tone. Sigri pauses for a moment, then grabs onto what was said, asks what happened, thinking if she is just now doubting herself. She lowers her gaze, admitting she definitely likes crafting, but she is not sure about her own skills because, well, if you remember how the village elder and the rest treated her, the whole story looks too complicated. Sigri just laughed it off and told her, as long as she likes what she does, everything is fine. Nomi looks impressed by her sudden energy. He shouts that her skills will definitely catch up with everything if she keeps this pace. He says he became the highest among the 4 heavenly kings only because he sincerely loved weapons and never stopped. Nomi just stands and looks at him, still not quite sure if there is any sense in this logic. Sigri bursts out laughing loudly, relaxed as if nothing, while Nomi just giggles and begins to feel how. A little more comfortable, she watches him and thinks he behaves like a really cheerful uncle at a family celebration. The serious mood is instantly killed by Nomi's rumbling stomach, so loud that everyone hears it, and she has to. Nomi blushes brightly red. Sigri just laughs even harder and jokes that she has quite a solid beat in her stomach before. Before apologizing for being a bad host, he tells her he will show the room later because it is clear that she is very hungry. They head to the noisy dining hall where other demons are already eating. Sigri leads her through the room and says the first priority is to throw at least some normal food into the system. He points to a huge plate and nudges, "Come on, eat whatever you want." But there is neither logic nor sense in this instruction. Nomi's eyes light up. She is surprisingly impressed by how many exquisite skewers and dishes are laid out all around. She looks at the sauce literally shining under the spotlights and thinks, chicken, or what kind of meat is this? Nomi shifts her gaze to the skewers and recognizes bell pepper and eggplant. She is bursting with happiness. She can't believe she is finally eating real food. She thanks Sigri when he says it's time to get to work, so she decisively reaches for the meat and takes a huge bite. She likes the sweet and salty teriyaki sauce coating, and in her mind, those charred pieces keep spinning. Let it be the taste of yakitori. She tells Sigris that it is incredible, and he lets her know that this is local chicken from Kitayama village. Nomi finds the vegetables no less fresh, especially the eggplants, which they were her favorites from a past life. To quench her thirst, she tastes wild grape water and admires how the honey makes it perfectly refreshing. Nomi finishes her drink, lets out a long sigh of relief, and looks at. She is completely satisfied with the food, but then starts to behave a little strangely. Sigri notices how she glances aside and asks what happened after all. He continues to scrutinize the drinks. He asks if she is looking at the wine, and no. Sigri remembers her grandfather loved to drink, but he just knew me. She giggles. But he worries, can a child like her handle this? Nomi stretches her hand all the way to. He shouts offended that she is an adult, and throws for a dwarf. Alcohol is like water. She boasts that she can drink a whole bunch, so therefore Sigri tells her they still need to work and that they have to wait until next time. While they walk, he whispers, sorry for dragging you when you were tired. Nomi insists that she is absolutely fine. It looks like she took all the energy back. They boast that the gnomes pride themselves on endurance and at the same time mention that the food was simply wonderful. Sigri laughs and says that he is glad she liked it because taking care of her was worth the effort. He starts a conversation about where she will sleep, explaining that the second floor of the castle serves as a dormitory. He himself says that he lives in the town below, but people from other places stay here. Nomi notices how the corridors darken and Sigri just jokes, supposedly called dorm, but in essence it is a real dungeon. He stops in front of the door and tells her that she has finally reached her new room. As soon as the door opens, Nomi freezes, widening her eyes pure disbelief. She cannot hold back and exclaiming in shock sees, everything here looks just like a traditional gnome home. She realizes this and her face lights up with joy as she says that the room feels like home. Sigra finally understood what is happening. It turned out that this room was built not by someone else but by the old man. So Nomi asks if he means the legendary former head of craftsmanship, and he replies, yes, exactly him. He explains how the gnomes hated high ceilings. They couldn't relax, so they lowered them. And they filled the space with dirt and even broke stone walls to dig more rooms. Zigris just shakes his head and wonders why anyone would go to such trouble for a dormitory. Nomi's eyes flash as soon as she shouts how much she loves digging in the earth and how insanely excited she is. He just stands still and thinks that the gnomes have a very strange taste, while Nomi relentlessly continues her research. She stops by the table and, mumbling to herself, says that everything here is still amazingly clean, crazy, but true. She runs her hand over the wood and notices not a speck of dust even after all this time. Also, having taken some old equipment, she decides, since these tools are here, she can start using them right now. Sigrun looks around the immaculate room and suddenly realizes the butchers probably had to regularly send cleaners here. Tingling nods me everything here was already prepared for the masters who were to come later, and this confuses her. She looks down at the old tools in her hands and quietly reads everything from them with her gaze, realizing that how much work lies ahead of her, especially since that lantern cemetery turned out to be much worse than she expected. It is clear why the room was cramped. All the broken lanterns from the great castle eventually ended up here, but sh. She thinks about meat and about how others rely on her, and because of this, she falls into despair even more, trying to be useful. Nomi throws a serious look at her, a specific thought stops in her eyes. And she says aloud how it gnaws at her that everyone treats these lanterns as if they were disposable junk. She thinks about demons searching for light and about the craftsmen who did their work so that they would shine. Remembering how her father once told her, never look at his creations as something that can simply be thrown away. Nomi thinks about how these lanterns were meant to shine as brightly as possible and be designed for years of daily use. She smiles holding one and realizes the original authors put so much love into their work, and blushing to herself, she finally admits that her heart is here because she simply likes crafting things. A look of complete determination flashes in her eyes. She is now fully convinced she really can do it. She shouts into the morning sky, as if seeking some help for her newborn confidence. When Sigrai stretches and sees that the sun has already risen, he says, finally, it's time for them to go to sleep. He waves goodbye with laughter, promises her that he will return in the evening, and asks her to rest well. Nomi stays behind and waves back. She is surprised that demons do not sleep all night just like gnomes. As soon as he disappears, the wall hits her and she stretches in place, feeling all her strength completely drained after a long night. She really wants to grab a bath before fainting completely, but right now she is barely holding on. Nomi enters the room and freezes at the threshold. What she sees inside takes her breath away and shocks her. She leans over the counter and laughs quietly in her thoughts. Everything here feels just like at home. She blushes feeling the water, and suddenly a simple realization comes to her. They even left her magical stones for fire and water so she could use them. It turns out the whole world relies on these magical stones, the main source of energy that makes everything work so easily. Nomi peeks over the edge of the bath with a huge smile and simply enjoys the fact that she can finally relax. And when she looks around the room again, she can't hold back and says out loud how much it all reminds her of home. She touches the water again and immediately feels it is perfectly warm, and she also notices the stones they left her once more. And it's incredible because these infused stones keep the basic operations running smoothly all over the world precisely, without failures. Nomi peeks over the edge of the bathtub and feels as if a huge burden has fallen from her shoulders, finally complete relief. Before she finally immerses herself in the hot water, she mentally counts how much time has passed since her last bath and concludes that this is a real salvation. Nomi thinks in the carriage she only had a wet rag, but a bath is something completely different, much better. Everything becomes much better, and it makes her realize this. A truly good soak really does wash the soul clean. Especially considering how long it lasts. All this time, the bath has actually been saving her life. She remembers how she wiped herself on the road, but honestly, nothing compares to a proper soaking like this right now. While she continues washing the dishes, one thought spins in her head. They definitely say that a bath cleanses the soul, not for nothing. She steps out, wraps her head in a towel, and sighs. All of this was too close. She understands if she catches a chill and gets a cold, there will be a terrible mess, so right now she would only create problems for everyone. She reaches for the machine on the counter, and it turns out to be a warm air dryer. Since the dwarves' underground dwelling is always damp and laundry takes forever to dry, everyone needs a fan so the air doesn't stagnate. Actually, it was Nomi who turned it on. It blew hot air so her hair would dry quickly and she wouldn't catch a cold. Nomi remembers how at home the girls laughed at her inventions and asked what the point of it all was, but now she feels almost light. She tells herself that she has finally become useful. Meanwhile, she laughs at the fact that her modified dryer turned out to be too convenient. Nomi buries herself in bed and says it's time to sleep. Tomorrow is a big day, except that. The next morning, she is already on her feet and working, humming a silly song about how magical stones are gnome droppings. And a huge shadow looms over her and a tall man calls the tiny girl. Nomi is still in the middle of the song when the demon lord stands right behind her and calls her by her new title. This makes her shudder and apologize for the strange singing, but he replies, "It's all right." He surveys her workplace with one glance and asks if she has really already started working. And as soon as she nervously confirms this, he admits he did not expect her to manage so quickly. Nomi looks down, feeling ashamed as she apologizes for getting ahead of things, but the demon lord objects. No need to apologize. He says he never gets angry at a person for hard work and honesty. So Midi steps forward and asks what is the reason for the current situation. Nomi immediately turns to the Prime Minister and addresses Lady Midis. While she hands over the sheet and reports that she has already compiled a full estimate for the repairs, the demon lord looks at it and quietly mutters, "I see that." While Nomi tries to gather her numbers, she explains, about 70 of the work is just simple fixes and for the rest, new magical stones will have to be obtained. And then she says that she has a few ideas she wants to try, so most likely, the total cost will not turn out to be that high. Nomi falls silent and shifts her gaze to both of them, asking if they are okay because they both, frozen in place, look at her report in complete shock. Midis can't even believe it and asks if their new chief craftsman is really some kind of genius. While she realizes how much money this will save them and even jokes to herself that she will have a better late snack, the demon lord thinks that this whole story is just pomp and Midis decides since Nomi is clearly the real deal, then the next item can be safely handed over. Medi stretches her hands over the ring of keys and explains that they provide access to rooms with equipment and materials, so. And then she takes out another one specifically for the workshop down the corridor and tells Nomi that she will officially manage everything. Nomi notices a tiny key on the ring and asks what it is for, so. Medi explains that it is for storing precious metals inside the workshop and adds, since they are demons, they don't really need this junk. Nomi takes responsibility upon herself and stubbornly shouts that she has everything under control, so they can rely on her while they walk down the corridor. Later, Nomi is left alone in the room. She leans on the table and recalls how they talked about a late-night snack. She begins to dream about food. Sweets are wonderful, but wouldn't something salty be very appropriate? Her thoughts spiral so deeply that suddenly catches a sound and sharply turns her gaze to the side. Nomi starts asking who is there, but at the same time, out of the corner of her eye, she notices someone and immediately gets so scared that her eyes widen, and she can no longer hold back. But it's just a horned demon in a costume. He instantly falls into a deep bow and gasping, wildly tells her how sincerely, extraordinarily sincerely, he regrets it. Nomi tries to stay calm. She tells the guy that everything is fine, she just got a little confused. The guy looks too scared and again apologizes for frightening her, begging for forgiveness. He doesn't calm down. He insists that he is not some suspicious guy, but just very nervous before meeting her, so he calls himself Setsubaith Man, who handles all the maintenance and repair of lanterns throughout the castle. Nomi immediately lights up and asks if he is really the lantern keeper she has heard about. Setsubai laughs and rubs his head. He says he heard the new chief crafting officer was just hired, so he simply couldn't wait to finally meet her. This confuses Nomi, and she begins to wonder if the castle is really already buzzing about her. She recovers from the shock and talks about the lanterns. She doesn't have that many yet, but already in a moment she rummages through her things and says she found a few, they just need quick repairs. Satsumi freezes, shifts his gaze, and can't believe his eyes, shocked she had already managed to get ready to go to work. Nomi nodded yes, and added that she had already checked all the little lanterns on the table twice to make sure they really worked. She shows there are even more on the shelf. "Come on, let's go," says Setsubai. "Go there and move that onto the table too." Setsubai can hardly believe his own eyes and asks if all these lanterns are really meant for him, so he looks closer and realizes this is not just new, this is quality a level higher than he has ever seen. Nomi notices that his voice is trembling. She calls him by name and asks what is happening when When Setsubai just starts crying right there, it knocks me off my feet, because why cry like that without a reason every time? Through tears, he still finds the strength to explain. The castle has long been suffering from a terrible shortage of lanterns. Corridors were so dark that it became dangerous, and the dining hall was so dim that people seemed to completely lose their appetites. It became so bad that the staff had to blindly find the lock slots in the dark, and Nomi immediately understood how unbearable it was. Setsubai wipes his eyes and admits they really tried to handle everything on their own, but none of their solutions helped much. Setsubai says they really gave their all with the tools they had, but because of the lantern problem, they couldn't even manage to do anything. Nomi listens to him and begins to piece together everything that happened. She asks herself if there is a specific reason why everything fell apart like this. She recalls that first lantern she found in the equipment room as soon as they arrived, and remembers how those screw holes were worn down to such a state that it looked truly shocking. It occurs to her that this guy probably just tried to force everything together, so she decides, better fix it before it's too late. Looking at him, she can't help but think, this demon is just naturally clumsy, and he keeps stalling, telling her how he managed everything himself up to this point. He admits that he once wasted time digging through the lantern graveyard, hoping for miracles, even knowing it was a futile effort. For him, all these wonderful working lanterns look like a complete dream before his eyes. Nomi sees again how he gets worked up, so she calls his name to calm him down. Nomi looks at Setsubai and says that for now, he only needs to bring her everything they have already managed to prepare. Setsubai recalls every broken lantern in the entire Demon King's castle and looks more serious than ever. Right here and now, she makes a huge promise to fix each one of them to the last. Setsubai is clearly moved. When he tells her he is sure it's because of her, tears well up in his eyes. And for a moment, Nomi is confused by the thought that no one else will care about living in the dark anymore. He showers her repeatedly with huge thanks and for the first time officially addresses her as chief artisan. Setsubai bows to him deeply and respectfully before pulling his equipment cart away, and Nomi just smiles and waves her hand as if to say, no need for formalities. But as soon as he disappears, she is overcome with determination. Not a minute can be wasted. Take off your gloves and get to work. And she immediately dives into a pile of tasks resolutely to level everything as quickly as possible. Clasping her palms together, she snaps her fingers, gathering her thoughts. She starts with the best, sorting everything by how worn out they are. Nomi immediately gets down to business, the first step to divide the whole pile into high-quality and low-quality lanterns. She immediately decides the best thing to do with the low-quality ones is to completely disassemble them, so she begins to disassemble everything down to the details to extract brass from the main parts for future repairs. Carefully, she stacks the glass panels and sets aside the boards, those made of valuable mithril. As soon as the topic turns to quality lanterns, she starts to lay them out one by one depending on how much work each requires. After some time, she manages to clear an entire shelf, but looking around, she sees the work is still piled high. She realizes that if she hadn't come, this lantern graveyard would have continued to grow endlessly. However, she does not give up. Each time she maintains a positive attitude and reminds herself of the code that every capable half-dwarf follows. Still, the work is 80 preparation and only 20 execution, and it is the preparation that decides everything. Although she knows that preparation is key, in her heart she admits, just sorting things out around the clock is starting to wear her down. Nomi examines the fragments, considering how to melt the very brass she once removed as soon as she gets the chance, but suddenly a voice cuts in from above. The workday is over, time to leave. Digris enters with a wave, saying that she did well today, so she should be proud of herself. He asks what she plans to eat, and she already involuntarily thinks about something light, something easy to handle. Then she changes her mind and tells him that she actually won't go eat. She says that she is overcome with fatigue and that she just wants to stay in the room, unpack her things, and Sigra, as it turns out, understands her completely. He reminds her that she is still very new here, so it takes some time to get used to it. Suddenly he flares up and declares he is the elder here, so he will buy her breakfast. And he loudly pats her on the back, commanding, if she wants to grow, she must eat well and sleep properly. Nomi is practically dying from that blow, but still tries to behave politely and thanks him for the offer. Nomi glances aside and tells herself, since she is half a gnome, she will never grow tall. Then she sits down to eat and starts to pull the cork from the wine bottle, getting comfortable. She says that it's time to get to work and begins pouring herself a drink into a small metal cup. As soon as she takes a sip, memories flash in her head, how in the village they once treated mead with these very cups exactly like this. But it turned out that it drinks surprisingly easily, and Nomi immediately feels a light buzz, which makes her think maybe she just needs to make real wine glasses for herself. Leaning on her hand, she thinks through how to use her metalwork to create the desired shape. But suddenly she realizes she can do it the way she wants and begins to sketch on paper. She wants to add exquisite chains to the design or even rare jewels to make it look truly cool. Anya remembers how in a past life she saw something like the Holy Grail in paintings. Nomi seriously starts to get carried away with her sketches, imagining a brass bass with amethyst and perhaps adding a ruby with obsidian or even some lapis lazuli so it looks like a starry sky. She can't help but smile to herself, saying aloud how terribly fun this all is. She simply takes all these thoughts in her head and turns them into art. Thinking about how to give them form and truly bring them to life, she looked back at her past life. There she always strove to create more than just do what she really liked. Then it was as if everything in her soul had already quieted down. She was endlessly exhausted by work and completely knocked off her feet. But as soon as she happened to see something beautiful, her heart still began to beat wildly. Despite the fact that she had almost come to terms with the thought her own designs would never become reality. So it became a real shock miracle for her to wake up and realize that she had been reincarnated. Nomi thinks in this world being a craftswoman is the same as being a jeweler in her old life, so everything was going exactly like that. It's easy to settle in, especially when Master Blacksmith dwarf blood flows through her veins. This new world is a place full of magic and monostones, and it makes her feel. It seems she is really capable of pulling something big out here, so judging by the open opportunities, there are fewer and fewer doubts. She understands now she can do things that were completely impossible before. It excites her so much that at that very moment she says, in life she will create everything she wants as much as she wants, as much as her heart desires. She looks at her own two hands and promises that she will do it, knowing, as long as she relies on them. As long as she has them, she can create things endlessly. Next SH. She wanders nearby, pours herself a drink, and thinks about how much healthier this workplace is than her old one. And she is simply happy that she finally has real time to devote to her hobbies. Nomi thinks about how cool it is to work in the Demon King's castle and feels as if the work is incredibly pleasing, but above all there is one part that she truly loves. She can't hold back her laughter at how easygoing and carefree these demons behave. She manages to think that they are clumsy before catching herself on this, nods at the lantern and realizes that now. But when she really thinks about it, she might be able to assemble this thing herself and achieve everything for significantly less money. She begins to figure out the shawl's pattern to understand how it is made. Later she walks the corridors and tries to decide which meat to take for dinner. All right, but she really craves fried cheese. Suddenly Sigra appears behind her and offers. He adds that she can take something to go with the wine. Nomi completely loses her composure and asks if he heard her talking to herself, he would just laugh and say it's good that she's hungry. As soon as Nomi and Sigra enter the dining hall, the cook immediately notices them. Their appearance is too excited, and as soon as they approach, he shouts, calling Master Sigra. They approach the counter and the cook immediately starts boasting about the daily dish. He says it's an exquisite fried black magic beef from MT Noko, which is based on. As if Nomi's dream came true, she looks completely obsessed. Her eyes literally sparkle just at the thought of eating that roast beef. Sigra doesn't even hesitate. He tells the guy that he will get him 2 portions of the special and a bottle of wine to go. But Nomi starts to get nervous. She twitches in place. She tries to start a conversation and get his attention, a bit uncertainly, as if hiding something, like she tells her that this time she really should pay. After all, she recently already received a gift. Sigrid bursts out laughing loudly and says it's okay, and then he leans in very close as if about to drop some secret information. He tells her that he is going to reveal a little secret. It turns out he is actually rich. He receives a huge monthly allowance as one of the Elite Four. Nomi's eyes widen sharply and that sound just throws her off track. The thought spins in her head that Elite Four allowance sounds like the most prestigious job with the highest salary. That's it. The chef returns with the order. He places the food on the table and apologizes for the wait. The chef serves the main event, a plate of Nakama black magic cow roast beef. It looks so appetizing that Nomi simply cannot pull herself together and remains on the edge. She stares at the dish as if it were a work of art before her. She is completely stunned, counting 5 huge pieces of meat and thinking about how it must be incredibly tender. As soon as she starts eating, the knife slides through the beef with no effort. Such a rich and flawless flavor that her heart races wildly even before she manages to take the first bite. She takes a piece, and he literally melts as soon as he touches her tongue. She is covered by a true paradise. The taste knocks her off balance, and he shouts to Sigra about the crazy meaty taste here, right next to her, rummaging in his plate and confirming that this is what it is. This is easily the best thing he has ever gotten. Nomi keeps eating and eating, thinking that if he mixes it even with crispy baguette, it will become so tasty that his cheeks might actually fall off. She shifts to her sides, speeding up from the delight of how generously and creamy the mashed potatoes taste. While Sigrid decides that this must be done properly, he says, since they are already enjoying this dish, why not also have some wine? So no. Nomi takes a sip and lets out a satisfied sigh, finally relaxing. Best lunch of her life. Nomi takes a sip and her face flushes with a bright blush as soon as she realizes the wine is actually sweet, which hits her with a fruity aroma so strong her head spins. She begins to think about how wine and beef fat mix perfectly, and she completely loses control because this combination actually created a whole new sauce right in her mouth. She calls it the perpetual motion machine of food and wine, shouts how much she loves being on the Four Heavenly Kings budget until. But they both continue to dig into the food. As soon as a little time passes, Sigra stops and says that something important has come to her mind. She looks around. Here at Nomi, I came to tell her that the whole castle is finally starting to look much brighter thanks to her. Nomi smiles while eating and says that it seems as if Setsubai managed to replace everything she could fix everywhere, but Sigra just nods and replies that none of this would have happened without all the hard work she did. He suddenly realizes he almost forgot to tell her something really important, and Nomi remains very confused while Sigra throws a serious look at everyone and says that tomorrow is finally the big day they have all been waiting for. Nomi looks impressed, repeats the words Sigra just said, and involuntarily asks if he really waited that long for this. Sigra raises a finger and smiles widely, explaining to her that tomorrow is finally Eagle Day. He leans forward with a serious expression and says that this is their weekly payment, which can. Nomi's face flushes with a blush. She just realizes that he is really right. She bursts into applause and exclaims that Eagle Day has finally come and she will be paid now. Sigrid tells her to hurry up and collect her pay during working hours before the storage closes on her, so no. Nomi keeps Lord Sigrid's words in her head as she goes outside, feeling fully charged with joy and bouncing down the corridor because she gets as many as 2 gold coins. Setsubai walks beside and thinks aloud about what food they should take on the way home tonight. They reach the office where the clerk calls the next person, and Nomi immediately approaches the counter. Nomi stands by the counter and introduces herself as Normi Lasmid Dwarger, trying to stay professional even if. The pay clerk just smiles and calls her chief crafting officer, checking her ID and grabbing the bag. But when the clerk says, "Here you go," and throws the sack, it thuds heavily against the counter so much that it makes Nomi stare at him in shock and get lost in thought. What is this too heavy to be just 2 gold coins? She starts guessing that maybe they accidentally mixed in a bunch of silver, and then nervously peeks inside. Only to find out the sack is already stuffed with gold. She grips it tightly and cannot understand why the amount is so large. She rushes off to run and looks for the demon lord, shouting at him because her pay is clearly too much. But suddenly she stops in the middle of the corridor and, looking at a complete stranger, freezes in utter confusion. The man lowers his gaze and notices her, and Nomi stands still watching in surprise as this sparkling demon says that she is the little creature from the rumors and asks why she is in such a hurry. Nomi looks completely stunned by this new guy, especially when he is called Ladu. And the Lord of Demons steps forward and orders Ladu to stop scaring the poor girl so much. Ladu just laughs and rubs the back of his head as if to say it's his fault. A blunt approach. He leans closer with a big, radiant smile and says his name is Ladu, adding, "It is an honor to meet him." Nomi just blushes and chokes on her own name, uttering it back in a trembling voice, completely overwhelmed by how much energy he has. She tries to concentrate and recalls, actually, she was looking for meaties even before all this happened. Meanwhile, Ladu mentally decides that Nomi is definitely a completely different type of person than the one he is used to. The Lord of Demons says he has never heard complaints about too high a salary and immediately, without wasting time, asks about the meat. So Ladu quickly salutes and sets off to find her, and Nomi only watches him go with her gaze. Medes finally appears and asks Nomi what happened, and Nomi inside starts to panic just from the fact that she called her name. Medes explains calling everyone Nomi is only temporary until she learns everyone's names. The Lord of Demons sharply intervenes. He tells the meat sellers that the child came not because of the pay, but because she thought her pay was simply a mistake. Nomi starts waving her hands, mixing up words and stumbling over a flat spot, trying to explain that she just wanted to double-check the numbers once more. Diomedes immediately get to work and call for a report from the northwest zone of the first floor. Crow suddenly twitches and goes crazy, realizing that from start to finish, someone has been closely checking her work all along. And Mids orders the bird to tell her every little detail about how Nomi did the work. She begins to itemize the payment for organizing the shelves and taking care of the lanterns. It comes to more than 1 gold coin. And then she adds the payment for sorting out all those defective lanterns, and the amount immediately jumps up. Nomi froze in shock while Mids explained. It comes to more than 10 gold plus a special bonus for her rank. Which makes Nomi wipe tears from her eyes as soon as she realizes she is being paid extra only for her new title. Nomi completely breaks down, realizing that she has already become a high earner, while Medes just watches from the side at sea. Note to self, they haven't even added the payment for organizing the shelves to the total amount yet. Nomi starts to panic and wave her hands, shouting that the initial amount was actually quite okay. Diomedes returns to the Demon Lord and apologizes for disturbing him, even though he is clearly busy with work. Zifra just laughs at the whole situation, calling Nomi a truly interesting little creature, and it leads nowhere. I know her. I come out to meet her. I think about how she tried to explain that the fee was too high and he was almost ready to offer even more. She feels the pressure of such a high evaluation on her and switches to an even tougher mode, giving her all. She walks along the corridor and glances. Her timing is perfect because everyone has just finished their late-night snacks. DeGraze appears again and asks the guard if the little creature is also heading to the office. Nomi gets annoyed and cuts in, saying she has a name and she is here only to confirm a few messages. Zigri says they are heading to a meeting about the expedition and asks if she wants to join. Nomi happily agrees and she walks alongside them and realizes she still has never seen either the Demon Lord or Midas in the cafeteria. Zigris admits that lately he has hardly seen them, and Latu adds, they always refuse him even when he invites them. Flying to the office, Latu shouts loudly to announce their arrival to everyone inside. Mides looks up from the pile of papers on the table and asks why everyone appeared at the same time. Nomi did great today and suddenly says they need to talk about something extremely important. Nomi looks a bit worried and, interrupting, states that she needs to ask the Demon Lord something before they start. She clarifies whether it is true that he just gnaws on that piece of dried meat as a late snack, and the Demon Lord, as if nothing special, replies, he understands everything, he is aware of it. Nomi begins to explain, dried meat is the best because he can work while eating it, and chewing gives him a feeling of fullness. Nomi silently stares at him as if her own brain is being tricked. How can one feel full without receiving any real nourishment? Nomi asks the lady what she is holding. The smell and appearance of it do not give her peace, they remind her of something familiar. Medes asks if they were given this in the Kingdom of Dwarves because they explained that it is just magical medicine stamina potion. The lady looks completely unhinged while boasting about her special potion. It has 5 times more thundergrass root so you can work forever. Nomi completely loses her composure and tells her that it sounds like nothing other than a dangerous drug, especially considering that masking your fatigue like that is a direct path to total collapse, and that is exactly what happened to Nomi in her past life. She admits she does not know if demons are different, but still cannot just stand aside and watch him overwork himself. She stuck right in his face and declared that he needs to eat proper food and finally take a break. The Demon Lord looks completely exhausted and dryly says that he still has a lot of work ahead, but no. Nomi becomes way too serious. Lack of sleep is your enemy. It slows down the brain and makes you make mistakes. Plus, it will immediately show on the skin, and she says that if you don't get enough sleep, the consequences will appear instantly. The Demon Lord sighs. His brain is already not working very well, while Medes is panicking about the condition of her skin. And this is the perfect chance for Nomi. She shouts that sleep is the most important thing right now, and 2 demons remain sitting opposite in complete silence. Medes finally puts down his drink and thanks Nomi for the advice, only then admitting that he clearly crossed the line. She asks Nomi if she really had some need and only then remembers they were supposed to talk about business. Nomi raises her gaze and explains that she wanted to talk about the lantern plan. She says she wants to preserve the original external appearance but completely replace the fillings with a magical board with a mainline track. Medes has never heard of such a thing before and asks if this is some secret dwarf technique, but no. But Nomi replies that this is just her own idea. It will allow using ordinary non-elemental stones instead of expensive light ones. Medes is completely stunned by this idea because it would sharply hit their expenses, and she crawls very close and tells Nomi that she needs to hear everything. Nomi demonstrates her latest development and explains that it is a day-night lantern, assembled with magical craftsmanship and an electronic circuit board S. Sigrai watches, repeating the name in a whisper, as if she cannot piece it together in her head. Ladu picks up the lantern and says that at first it looks ordinary, but then notices a strange switch for light and darkness. The room suddenly becomes completely black and everyone jumps up, shouting for someone to finally keep themselves together. In total darkness, Nomi panics and shouts to Ladu to just flip the switch back to that side, and then everything will be resolved. When the light turns on again, the guys just stand and stare with empty eyes as if they were squeezed out by that shock. Sigris actually loves it, slyly smiles at Nomi and says that it is simply incredible, because now he can finally sleep well during expeditions. The Demon Lord also looks quite relaxed. He tells how that darkness actually calmed him down, but Medes sharply shifts to a serious tone and asks Nomi if the lantern really works only on an ordinary non-attribute magical stone. Nomi looks her straight in the eyes and proudly confirms yes, exactly so. Nomi begins to falter in words, telling in detail how her new day-night lantern navigator works and how it differs from those everyone is used to. She says that an ordinary lantern is wasteful. It simply burns mana and the light properties of expensive stones. But her version is completely different, a magnetic circuit board microchip plus a special imitation crest engraved directly on it. Such a setup actually allows copying the properties of light, so Nomi can use cheap substitute stones instead of rare ones. And since the stones do not run out but simply copy, this whole thing lasts almost forever. The light flows evenly and effortlessly from the basic magical stone. Nomi adds that the dark mode works the same way, it just copies dark or and switches between the two a matter of a few seconds. Medes processes what she heard and asks if she really just uses a cheap stone as a power source to imitate a high-quality one. Nomi blossomed with emotion and told her that this is exactly how she pulled it off. Sigrais and the guys look completely stunned by the technical talk, but he mutters that it would have been a colossal problem if she hadn't done everything so efficiently. Setsubai raises his voice and asks if everyone is okay with him doing a live demo of the assembly while walking them step by step through the process. And Medes thinks it's a great idea, so she says how lucky she is to see the production chief demonstrate her abilities in person. Nomi says a little embarrassed, she's actually even uncomfortable being watched but still grabs the table. She settles into her workspace and announces to the group, finally ready to start the show. While she prepares, she mentally reviews what her mother left her, in particular that shoulder bag and the grimoire all about magical crests. At first glance, the bag seems quite simple, but in reality it is a magical artifact. It holds a ton of stuff and yet never looks bulky. At first she thought it was just a convenient tool, but suddenly she notices something hidden inside, reaches out her hand, finds F. They're a creation of one feather, sitting almost mixed with a piece of fabric embroidered with a magical coat of arms. Nomi lifts the page and gazes at the star-shaped mark, wondering if it indicates some kind of copy. She raises the feather up, completely puzzled. Why would anyone even make a copy of a bird's feather? Nomi carefully examines the plume. She immediately understands. Its special features were copied to create that bag with incredible capacity. In fact, it's a cool trick. It allows her to embed special powers into ordinary things, and he is 100% sure, if you put everything together, something truly impressive will come out. She cross-checks her notes on magical embroidery and does not take her eyes off what she has to do. She announces to the group that she will now start cutting magical crests directly onto the mithril plate. Setsubai watches intently, repeating the words magic crests, while the demon lord stands nearby and listens silently. Nomi sits at the table and thinks about the accounting book, recalling the embroidery skills her mother passed on to her. She focuses on the craft she has developed over time, carefully cutting out these crests, pouring mana into them. She is overwhelmed by thoughts of her father and about how everything she created led to this moment. All the new ideas she picks for different combinations while Setsubai watches, completely stunned. Nomi finally decides to give her new invention a name and calls it Magitech. And Mid seems to completely lose control from the beauty of the mana, whispering that this is exactly what she expected from the castle's chief master. Nomi shows the finished magic circuit board and literally trembles with excitement, the engraving of the imitation crest is finally complete. She declares the next step is to assemble everything together and place it in the Akatsuki stone lantern. I explain the light source comes from dawnstone. It is much cheaper and easier to obtain than other stones. She explains when mana is used as a power source, the light spreads even further, making the carnivores think about the ancient lanterns that once stood in the corridors when she first appeared in the castle. Nomi confirms that's exactly the idea. Essentially, it's a much better version made for mass production. She pulls out non-elemental stones and says they are perfect because they only need to be nourished with mana. Nomi hands the finished lantern to the Amon Lord, and he carefully examines her work. The Demon Lord looks intently at the lantern made by Nomi and thinks about how incredibly warm its light is. But Nomi immediately intervenes and explains the technique. She copies specific properties so it doesn't even cast a shadow. Medes is completely stunned by the flawless masterpiece, noting how it illuminates everything and leaves no blind spots. She adjusts her glasses and says she feels that the kingdom seems to have been gifted a terrible talent from the dark gods, while Sigris keeps it simple. He doesn't understand the math, but he knows this little lady is simply incredible. The Demon Lord looks intently at Nomi and involuntarily thinks how she is so small and so cute, and how exactly she is a truly brilliant gem for the entire nation. And he teases that he will lock her in a treasure chest, which makes Sigris burst out laughing, saying, "How will the dwarf mimic be useful then?" Medes starts crunching the numbers crisply and concludes, at first the materials will cost a fortune, but it is worth it for the future. She turns back to the Demon Lord and declares that they simply must name this invention a national treasure. But even when the Lord agrees that he needs heavy protection, Nomi still snaps and throws back at them. This is a tool that must be used. Nomi looks at her own work and runs through the next steps. She just needs to mass-produce these schemes and immediately replace them all. While she recreates in her head how it all started, she honestly admits, at first she was really very anxious about how it would go, but it was enough just to see how everyone's faces light up from her invention, and the world immediately changes. Setsubai and Sigris shift their gaze to the lantern while Nomi watches them. She finally felt this is her first big goal, as if a whole burden fell off her shoulders. Now she definitely is not wasting time because her work is truly needed by someone. And there is nothing better than the moment when you see people are so happy because of what was made by her hands. She stands nearby with a gentle smile. She thinks she never knew before that helping could feel so good. She's about to gather herself when someone suddenly shouts to the head of craftsmanship. Midezi and the others stand nearby as the call echoes through, and Setsubai waves his hands to get her attention. He shouts to her, smiling broadly and like this, as if the large-scale crisis with the huge lanterns in the Demon Kingdom, which haunted everyone, has officially ended. Now everyone can finally breathe easy, knowing that the work is done. Setsubai starts installing new lanterns, and Nomi stands nearby laughing, completely happy with how everything turned out. Nomi finally relaxes after a long workday, takes a big sip of her drink, and feels as if she literally dissolves into the chair. Sigris appears and waves to her with a friendly gesture. He asks the young lady if she likes the drink, while somewhere nearby they shout his name. He says that the day-night lantern hung by her works perfectly and has become a huge help. He is simply delighted that everything is going as it should. And then he leans closer and his expression becomes more serious. He asks how the rest of the remodeling work is progressing, but no. Nomi's face dims a little as she explains. It turns out that dawnstones are actually extremely rare and hard to find on the market. She says that everything is completely sold out right now. The sales department manager was sent to look for additional supplies, but so far she is just doing basic repairs on the original lantern so as not to sit idle. Sigri goes and nods while he eats, carefully absorbing everything she says. He pauses for a moment and asks why she can't just replace them with ordinary magical light stones. However, Nomi, she immediately rejects this idea. She explains, elemental stones cause colossal power overload due to how the magic crest copies energy. She admits finding a workaround was a real struggle. Just at that moment, Medes approaches with a tray to join the conversation. Medes gives a warm smile and tells Nomi that she worked hard during the day, and the little one responds by greeting her with lots of energy. Sigri speaks up. Medes looks much healthier today. Medes himself is surprised how he even noticed this change. She lowers her gaze and admits that getting rid of the lantern problem was an incredible weight off her shoulders, but that is not the only thing, she says. After advice to eat better and go to bed earlier, she is really in a very good mood. Midis looks around and asks Nomi if the real trick is the quality of the food, and Nomi is exactly for that. He is all about it. The girl begins to explain, it is important to keep protein balanced with meat or eggs and also add plenty of vegetables so the skin looks proper. She flips through the morning menu and names the dishes as if suggesting a recipe: steamed stew, fried pork, and also skillfully wrapped in vegetables. Then she offers to try a lean magical steak plate and salad. At these words, Medi involuntarily thinks that it is definitely time for her to start trying such things for herself. Nomi puts the puzzle together. Meads and Sigris are from the same year, so the demon lord is probably also somewhere in this circle. But at the same time, she soberly understands. No matter what, she has never once seen the big boss show his face in the dining hall. Nomi looks very worried. She is already thinking whether the demon lord is too busy to come to dinner. She asks Sigris if the big boss really feels okay, but he is silent and stays aside. Returning to the village, the leader goes crazy and slams a document on the table, shouting, "What does this mean?" It turns out they were cut off from trade because they sold low-quality magical stones and lanterns at excessively high prices. The chief is busy scolding the people who cut them off when suddenly a villager bursts into the room in panic. The man breaks into a shout. Nomi's old house has completely disappeared without a trace, and he has no idea what is going on. The chief just shouts, "Shut up," and without lowering his voice, yells that they now have much bigger problems to think about. He is trembling with sweat, and he still cannot understand why everything starts falling apart right after they finally kicked out that outsider girl. The village has no idea that having lost her, they have just triggered their own doom, but in Nomi's castle there is silence and rest. She looks incredibly happy, sipping cold herbal tea with honey as if this is the best thing that could have happened. Medes enters the room, greets Nomi, and asks if she is finally ready with the thing she ordered, and Nomi looks a bit surprised and says that today Medes did simply wonderfully. She herself was indeed going to bring it, but Medes just waved it off, saying she happened to be nearby anyway, so it was no trouble at all. Nomi pulls out the item, beams with a smile, and asks Medes just to look quickly check if it is exactly what she wanted. Nomi pointed out that the hinge on the seal's handle was not broken, just worn out and loosened. She also explains the wax warmer needs to be cleaned and a fresh magic stone inserted, then it will heat properly again. And when Medes tries it on herself, her eyes widen, the irritating wobble completely disappears. Medes honestly admits that she was already ready to just buy a new one, so this repair is a real salvation and even makes Nomi shine with pride. While Midi quietly thinks that the girl could use a bonus, Nomi remains modest about simply doing her job, but then Midi notices something strange and asks what is wrong with that huge cup on the table. Medes gives Nomi approving feedback for her attention to detail. The girl shows her latest project, and Nomi introduces it with a huge smile, calling her new invention the chili goblet, right at the moment when she touches it quite meatily, Nomi realizes the metal is cooling. She thinks this is another oddly useful thing that Nomi crafted. Nomi hugs the hedgehog and explains, the forge's heat is overwhelming, but in her head she only has a cold drink, so there is a spark in her eyes, she says, just imagine how it could be. She lists a bunch of things: ice cold milk, biscuits, hot chicken skewers, and even a fizzy honey drink. She says there is nothing better than the first cold sip after a long workday, when you rubbed yourself on the grinder and climbed up, because it literally wipes away all that fatigue, and this definitely catches Medi's attention just at the moment when Medi presses the cup closer and realizes, to the touch, it is nothing other than ice gold. Medes asks if she pulled it out using the legendary stone of ice magic, and Nomi admits, such things are too hard to find, so she just used the magical cold field emblem. Medes looks completely exhausted, so even while asking questions, she can't get one thing out of her head: is the magic on the cup really a barrier? I think it's a colossal waste of talent to use magic of that level just to keep a drink cold, but Nomi tells her no, so yes, Medes figures know her, they just weighed her natural talent too well, and unfortunately, it didn't work in her favor. Medes asks if she can actually buy this cup, and Nomi replies, just have her bring one for free, all that's left is to thank her. Because in reality, she only needs one thing for everyone to feel the joy of a cold drink after work. Suddenly, as if out of thin air, a demon lord appears, all collected, serious, and taut like a string. Nomi immediately panics and promises him a cup as well, although Medes has no idea why he even came. Nomi trembles a little as she asks what exactly he wants from her. And the demon lord falls silent for a moment, then says there is something he really wants her to see before Before he stretches out his hands, Nomi freezes and stares at what he holds, trying to guess what it could be. Nomi looks at the thing in the demon lord's hands as if it's just a tiny cushion, but the strange eye pattern makes her think the whole thing is creepy, and she can't help but shudder a little when the demon lord says the pattern looked exactly like the magical crest she recently sketched. Nomi looks closer and realizes he is really right. Her mood lifts from the discovery. She stared at the symbol of the eye and decided that it was some kind of illusion magic. It was definitely familiar to her, so she looks him straight in the face and asks where he even found something like that. He has a rather calm expression on his face, while he explains that it is called a dream pillow and that it actually came straight from the secret treasury of the castle. They say that it is an item of the highest level of magic, created to give you incredible dreams while you hold it right by your head during sleep. And the demon lord admits he used to use it constantly to finally rest properly between all his royal duties. At first it was wonderful, but now it is just a broken piece of junk that no longer does anything. Because of this, he looks too broken maybe. That is why Nomi is a bit wary. This thing is so dark and gloomy. She asks if such a terrifying, completely unsympathetic creature can really give someone a good sleep, and then Nomi decides to try and offers to fix it. Since she already knows how the magic crest works, she is quite confident she can get it running again for him. Nomi asks the demon lord what kind of good dreams he even gets from that creepy pillow. And he looks way too satisfied when he says that he dreams of nights where a nightmare monster holds him tightly. Nomi is completely shocked by his strange taste. She realizes that she barely manages to respond to something so strange. She just tells him what she sees, stands there awkwardly while she thinks to herself that their tastes are too different. She is sure they will never manage to be on the same page, and then she returns to work at her desk. Having examined the object, Nomi realizes most likely it was a cursed artifact from the very beginning, and yes, it all makes sense because she sees black hair sticking out, and it turns out it's a remnant of a nightmare monster. A magical sign lies on it to cover everything with illusions, and moreover, it is made to draw mana from anyone sleeping nearby. She honestly is impressed by the craftsmanship. She contemplates this, about how much she would like to fix it for him. But one problem, she doesn't know how to embroider with those delicate techniques to restore the fabric, so a bright thought flashes in her mind. If the new object does the same job, then an ordinary crafted tool will work without problems. Nomi begins to think that a lantern could be a perfect replacement, but she is still trying to put everything together and make it work as one. Nomi runs through the idea of a dream instrument in her head and wonders if there is a design suitable for something better than this old pillow. She pulls memories from her past life and thinks about how much she loved covering her eyelids before sleep with those warm, pleasantly scented eye masks. But then other options come to her: relaxing aroma sprays or incense she once burned, and everything forms into one clear picture. She realizes an incense burner is the perfect solution. She is bursting with inspiration. She is sure everything will turn out great, so she decides to call it a dream burner because it is intended for sleep. She thinks it needs a vibe check and tells herself that to make the design truly fit the demon lord's room, she sits down and immediately starts drafting. Drawing the scheme, she finally gets used to sketching these complex magical crests and doesn't want to waste time. She just starts. She switches on and focuses on the paper decisively so as not to smudge a single detail. She goes through sketch after sketch until she finally finishes the drawing. She smiles at the result, looks closely at the sketch, and realizes that while she inserts nightmare hair inside, this new tool will work exactly like the dream pillow, only much more stylish. Nomi looks at her work and thinks, aren't these magical crests? She still can't believe they are even allowed, that they can be used to see nightmares. But this gives her a great idea. If she uses them correctly, she can recreate things from her old life, so she decides to make notes later. She jumps up, fills with strength, and whispers to herself, time to start with the main part of the burner standing, fully charged with energy, so that finally she pauses, wipes sweat from her face. She says that forging metal definitely takes a lot of time, and it's much harder than those lanterns she is already used to crafting. Here you can't just cut and solder parts together. She sits down again and gets to work, telling herself that she's almost done, just needs to stretch a bit more so that she can finish the base. She lifts it and beams, seeing that the hammered surface turned out simply wonderful. Then she checks the fitting of the decorative cover. She shows how the top overlay should lie, and when this part is ready, she sits at the table to take the final step. She says that you just need to insert the magic chain board inside and everything will be ready. Nomi focuses on the details. She says that half the space is allocated for the magic stone on the stand and the switch, and then the bus. While she lays the other side for the catalyst, she tells herself, as soon as the power lines are installed and the top and bottom are connected, everything will be ready. She finally finishes working on the design and looking at the shiny metal burner standing among the flowers says, "Done." He throws out, "This is perfect." She lifts the relic and declares that it is worthy of being offered to the demon lord and then she begins to immerse herself in the material and hiccups with delight. She runs her cheek over the metal and says that brass always has such a soft, muted look the more you use it. She wants to try it immediately but suddenly realizes it is still too early to interfere with nightmare hair, so she stops half a step. So she decides that chamomile tea will work just as well for a quick experiment. She thinks that hallucinations with chamomile sound simply exquisite and starts preparing the tea. Her hand reaches for the device and she presses the power button to start the burner, but then everything goes completely wrong. Ghostly children's faces emerge from the steam and she is overwhelmed by an unnatural feeling, not relaxing at all. She eventually completely breaks down and says that these visions are actually just terribly frightening. Nomi tears at her soul to break free from this psychosis and insists that she must turn on the timer. If she accidentally falls asleep and stays asleep, she will be in great trouble. She looks once more at T1 and decides for herself. She will never touch chamomile again for a very, very long time. Later, she enters the office and lets herself in, politely greeting the Lord of Demons and the lady. She steers the conversation toward their last interaction and explains, since the embroidery didn't work out, she took on something else. He shows the finished product and calls it a magical device dream furnace. The Lord of Demons examines it carefully and is utterly overwhelmed by the beauty of the craftsmanship. And he asks, stammering a little, if it really works like that dream pillow. Nomi lays everything out for him clearly and says, if he simply hides some nightmare hair inside and keeps it right by the pillow. He finally gains the ability to see dreams, and because of this, the Lord of Demons' eyes open wide like. But suddenly he breaks off, approaches her closely, and asks if, by putting Garm fur into their tools, he will finally be allowed to dream of Garms. Nomi flinches and says that nightmares have the properties of sleep, so everything should work, although she still feels uneasy about it. She adds, with any other creatures, they truly won't understand if it works until they let him try. Nomi is completely confused. Why would he even want to dream about a garb if these terrifying creatures are scary by themselves? The Demon Lord says he understands everything, then gets worked up and declares he'll try right now, after all, he has a lot of fur. He shouts that they must immediately get to the Sea of Fluff and leaves Nomi standing there alone. Midi calls out Demon Lord aloud with a serious expression, but then everything goes completely differently. Then she strikes him with magic and reminds him that he still has a mountain of urgent work to finish and wear. And the demon lady admits she is right and declares, leaving his work unfinished definitely means ruining his sleep schedule. He looks at Nomi, gives her a soft smile, and thanks her for giving him such a wonderful gift. Nomi blushes a little embarrassed and says she is just incredibly touched and he likes that. Nomi clenches her fists, insists she is happy and that he really liked the gift, but still feels too insecure. She admits she feels a little bad right now, saying maybe she should have been more careful. Looking back at the dream furnace she finished yesterday, she starts to spiral more and more and endlessly replay the whole situation in her head. He has no way of knowing if the quality was top level, but cannot decide if the Demon Lord dreamed something truly good. She can hardly believe that he even managed to finish his work and go to sleep, and at this very moment, the Demon Lord suddenly appears, standing silently and quietly peeking through the door. Nomi sees that he is all disheveled and immediately panics, asks what happened. He looks closer and asks if maybe he finally had a bad dream. He looks at his reaction. Nomi gets even more confused and asks if he was looking for a good dream or a bad one. The Demon Lord makes a barely audible sound and Nomi's eyes widen as soon as she notices something is definitely wrong here. Nomi glances at the stove and immediately understands. The entire printed circuit board is completely destroyed while she says that restoring such levels of damage is a real project, the Demon Lord just stands still and looks for a way out. He looks completely overwhelmed as he apologizes. Nomi raises her eyes and asks if he just dropped it accidentally, but he feels bad. He looks away and admits that this whole situation is entirely his fault. He begins to X. He explained that he tried to use it in the office, and for the first time in a long time he had an incredible dream. And he got so excited about this idea that he wanted to show off to the guards in front of the meaties and cigars. He shows, As he handed it to them and just took a step, everything suddenly went awry. He shows how he stumbled and started fumbling roughly with the device while everyone else just watched. Until it hit the ground. Nomi watches as he talks about the accident and thinks it all sounds like a crazy chain reaction. Sigrise asks if he really got injured during the fall, but he brushes it off, saying everything is fine because Middy's already examined him. Nomi turns to the demon lord with sincere joy, says he is fine. He looks depressed, his head is low, so he apologizes again and laments how much this artifact meant to him. Nomi looks him straight in the eyes and promises, she is fine, so don't worry. She adds that since she will have to fix the furnace anyway, she will install new updates there, but in the end it might take a little more time. Nomi gives him a broad, confident smile and says she will fix everything for him no matter what. She even winks. That's exactly why she took the position of chief craftswoman from the very beginning and asks him to just leave all this matter to her. But then she becomes a bit too serious, warns him that if he is not careful, another accident could happen at any time, so he better keep the stove right next to his pillow. And she starts scolding him a little, says he should properly stay in his bedroom and get enough sleep. The demon lord stumbles a bit and blushes, quietly telling her that he understands what she means. He leaves the room, waves in response, and calls toward his dreamworld furnace, promising that he will wait for him forever. Nomi watches him go and gradually withdraws herself, thinking that this job actually turns out to be quite a wonderful place. Nomi turns to the kitchen and calls out loudly to Mr. Makari, make him understand that she is here to collect all the bent spoons and forks that need fixing. The chef looks very pleased to see her and says, with her help there really is a big difference. She explains that since the last crafter left, they haven't been able to fix anything, and the stock of tableware is already very depleted. Although he still mostly confusedly doesn't understand why everyone keeps bending them, Nomi just laughs, but as soon as she glances at the mangled fork, the realization hits her fully. This is the same strange problem she had already seen with the lanterns. It suddenly occurs to her, maybe the demons in this castle aren't so skilled after all. She just thought otherwise. And this gives her an idea. She decides to embed a magical crest into the demon lord's dream furnace so that it won't break, and she remembers that in her notebook there were some notes about physical protection, so she plans to test this a little later. Still, she thinks putting so much work into simple kitchen forks is probably overdoing it. Nomi grabs the tray with the mangled pieces of silverware and carries it back to her workshop, while the cook says he truly counts on her to fix everything as soon as possible. As she walks, a plan for the next move is already forming in her mind. She recalls that Setsubai said most of the lanterns she repaired are already in place around the castle. She instantly sums up, only one main task remains on her to-do list, and then she acts. She tracks the meat ones while they, taking advantage of a quiet pause, enjoy their tea. Nomi asks if Middy's is on a break and if she can have a moment to talk, and Middy's happily replies that nothing is bothering her at all. Nomi says that the lanterns on the castle have finally stabilized and now she wants to gather materials for the camp as well. After that, she asks, is there any news about Dawnstones and Darkrux? Middy's reports that the trade department has not yet found any information about these specific stones, and this disappoints Nomi greatly. Then Middy's recalls the magical stone manager will arrive at the castle tomorrow on a regular trading day, so she suggests Nomi just go talk to him. He reasons that Nomi has not yet had a chance to meet that guy. Hope appears a little. She asks if she can try to speak to him directly as soon as he arrives. Middy's tells Nomi that this is absolutely not a problem and adds she should not hesitate, let her ask if she suddenly needs anything for the meeting. Nomi begins to wonder who in the castle is responsible for the magical stones. Curiosity does not let go. She wants to know what they are like, so she asks with whom exactly they are making the deal this time. Middy's explains that tomorrow is a day ending with the letter O, so the trade is actually with the Kingdom of Dwarves, which completely confuses Nomi. She is shocked, repeats the name of the kingdom, and immediately recalls the cruel head of that town that threw her out. Later, everyone sits down at the table for dinner and says, time to get to the food. The whole group starts eating and lets out satisfied sighs as they savor the hot dishes together. Nomi thinks the soup is incredible. The bone marrow was melted completely, so she felt the taste is exactly the same as tonkatsu ramen, which she remembers. She feels like smiling a little and jokes to herself that all that's missing is a bit of red pickled ginger, while next to her, Ladu and Sigris are bursting with admiration. The food is so delicious that both insist this lunch is simply amazing. Meaty takes a sip and surprisingly it overwhelms him. The soup is too mild, he says, but at the same time incredibly rich with such a deep flavor and then Makari intervenes and tells the Prime Minister that this whole dish was actually Nomi's idea. Nomi explains the pork bones in the kitchen were too good to throw away, so she decided they would be perfect for this, even despite the fact that Makari admits he had never heard of anyone ever making soup from bones until she appeared. He explained that they followed her instructions word for word, added the right spices and let the pot simmer for exactly 10 hours straight so Meaty completely loses control over how much work went into it. 10 hours is an insane amount of effort for one dish. Nomi just smiles and throws in that it's also good for the skin and Mitz involuntarily pays attention. Metis beams with joy and tells Makara, let her put it on the regular menu, and Nomi is just happy to see her enjoying it. At the other end of the table, Ladu eats eagerly and declares that the soup is so tasty it warms him to the very core. And he involuntarily thinks, if he had really stayed in the castle, he would eat such incredible food every day. Ladu rests his head on his hand and looks completely exhausted as he says that the trade audit will just finish today, and he will immediately head to the camp for the expedition. Nomi sees how this guy dreams of being anywhere but here. He groans that he doesn't want to go outside, and it immediately becomes clear this audit is by no means trivial. She begins to piece everything together, recalling, today the Dwarf Kingdom is actually coming to the castle to exchange a magic stone, and that immediately takes her breath away. The kingdom is large, the chance of seeing someone she knows is almost negligible, but the very thought twists her stomach and it hurts. Just then, Sigri grabs Ladu by the face and orders him to stop complaining. From now on they will all sleep much better because the little lady made those dark lanterns for them. So Sigro must definitely thank her, and Nomi just stands still and lets out a nervous chuckle because the way they both behave is suffocating. Sigri moves closer, grinning with a huge, terrifying smile, and says that her invention is a real salvation for the crew, leaving everyone. Gnome stands and looks straight at him. She barely manages to utter a trembling yes while trying to cope with his energy. She continues to remain polite and nod, although it is clear she is already a bit overwhelmed by everything happening around. But it turned out, although the lanterns work perfectly, there are still catastrophically too few of them to distribute to the entire platoon as a whole. Nomi sits and sweats, repeatedly telling herself that as the main person responsible for manufacturing, she must keep everything under control. To gather all the ore for magical crafting that strengthens the castle, she needs to constantly monitor the inventory and the execution of orders. And finally she lifts the bowl and tells herself, just stop living with your traumas already. She sharply finishes the rest and ends the meal, feeling much more ready for the new day. Meanwhile, Nomi shouts at Laduo, faster, and they head to the magic stone exchange so Laduo can say that she is fully energized, but just as they are ready to take off, Nomi remembers one more thing, something she needs to do first. She looks too nervous as they say goodbye to Sigrise and the rest of the crew for now. And a little later, as she walks down the corridor, Latu says that she feels quite pleased because the Demon Lord seemed extremely grateful for what she did. He is curious anyway, so he asks Nomi what exactly she gave to the big boss, but she says that she actually made him a small talisman, but it broke during a very bad accident. Nomi says that she went further and fixed the little things she made for the boss, and at the same time smoothed out a few extra problems while she was still responsible for it. She explains to Ladu, in this piece she added physical protection, and it is because of this that everything finally came together for him. Ladu replies that thanks to her efforts everything became much more convenient, and sincerely thanks her with all his heart. Leaving Nomi completely embarrassed, she stammers hastily, always please, and her face flushes with a bright blush from the compliment. She thinks to herself, while she is happy, so much praise is actually quite uncomfortable. Moving on, Ladu opens the door and orders her, come inside, Lei. Leading Nomi leads to inspect the new territory and asks if they have finally reached the trading room. Ladu explains that they are, on the contrary, right in the next room. Here they stand guard so that no suspicious schemes are carried out and so that no fight starts and so that nothing terrible happens. They further add that for any trade with other countries they must ensure the presence of both a military and a civilian official. He clarifies the last detail once again, says that from the other side of the glass this entire observation space looks like an ordinary picture. Nomi looks at the glass and realizes it's just a big two-way mirror, He glanced at Ladu and asks if it's really his turn to work today, but he just laughs and says, watching is a job for lower-ranked guys, not for the 4 heavenly kings. He explains that today he actually arranged for someone to cover his shift, and he could also find time to show Nomi everything around when they went out. Nomi is completely stuck on what he just said when she asks again if he really mentioned the 4 heavenly kings. Ladu winks and boasts with a pose pretending self-satisfaction, as if he is not drunk at all but actually the second drunk member of the elite guard of the Demon Kingdom. Nomi's jaw drops, she can't even process what she saw and asks if he is really serious or just joking. She recalls the moment when they first met and decides that he is just some ordinary official working under the Medes, but as soon as she looks at him now, another thought comes to her mind: he is actually much stronger than she imagined. And she feels dizzy. She doesn't believe she is hanging out with the real trio, number 2 in the entire army formation. Nomi tries to be polite and thanks Ladu for finding time to show her everything, but due to strong nervousness, she finally calls him Lord Ladu. Ladu tells her to stop. It's just awkward when the brilliant chief master hears himself being called that way, so he advises her to use some ordinary title instead. He leans in very close and breaks into a broad smile, almost pleading for her to stop being so formal with him while he checks the time and realizes they need to keep up the pace, otherwise they will be late for the next stop. Just then a girl in a sharp uniform passes by them and Nomi is so flustered by how cool she looks that she abruptly stops. She can't take her eyes off her, thinking how incredibly beautiful she is, and involuntarily wonders if she might be some high-ranking lady from the aristocracy. Nomi immediately notices the difference. The girl in front of her is completely different: no horns, no wings, but the ear fins and long hair are simply striking. She understands without words. Seeing a person with such features near the Demon King's castle is actually rare. And Ladu clarifies everything, explaining that she controls magical stones, so he tells Nomi they need to approach and greet her. Laduo calls her with a friendly greeting and the girl abruptly stops, looking back at them with slight surprise. The magical stone leader looks impressed seeing how Ladu works and asks if he is even on duty today. Keeping him on guard happens very rarely. Ladu immediately keeps a calm face and says he had a few tasks to finish, and this leads him to explain with a self-satisfied smile he actually transferred the man who was supposed to be on duty to his shift. He suddenly pulls Nomi forward to introduce her. He is full of energy himself, and Nomi is completely caught off guard and immediately starts to get very nervous, though she tries to be polite, stumbles, barely utters a greeting, and tells the leader that she is pleased to meet him. The supervisor looked at Nomi and immediately started lecturing Ladu, saying that you can't just kidnap Fey children like it's a trivial matter. Nomi is completely stunned by this confusion, while Ladu defends himself and tells the supervisor, talking about him like that is truly a terrible thing. And he laughs it off with a joke, but leaning closer, he lets her understand she is definitely not some random Fey he snatched for himself. For a moment he becomes serious to put the dots over the I's, explaining that she is actually the new chief master responsible for everything better than the Demon King's castle. He makes a loud revelation, shouting her name and introducing her as Nomi-san, while she stands still looking as if she might disappear any moment. The supervisor stops and freezes, staring intently at Nomi, trying to digest the fact that this tiny girl is actually a high-ranking official. Aquarine looks confused. She was sure the newcomer was a dwarf, so she asks Nomi if she really is a gnome. Shaking off her confusion, she gives a friendly smile and introduces herself, Aquarine Lil Rade, and then Nomi says, let everything be relaxed, and calls her just by her first name. Nomi immediately initiates the acquaintance. Nomi Lasme Diverger and asks to be called simply Nomi, but while they are talking, Nomi notices the name sounds familiar, so she asks if she is related to Lord Sigris. Aquarine confirms both of them are from the Rade clan. Aquarine tells how Nomi eventually inherited the famous name of her grandfather, and Nomi explains in response, it was actually the demon lord who gave it to her by ear. This makes Aquarine smile. She recalls how sincerely her grandfather cherishes his own legacy and moves on with the same calm mood. Nomi slightly disrupts the flow of conversation. She says she heard Aquarine recently went on a journey to search for a specific magical stone. Aquarine clarifies Lady Midis suddenly made a request, so she had to travel all the way to the land of the Beastmen. After that, she looks at Nomi and asks if she was the one who ordered it. Nomi noticeably gets nervous seeing how much effort was put into it, so she immediately pulls her leg and thanks her for such a difficult job. The conversation breaks off when Aquarine notices someone approaching and sharply shifts her gaze to Nomi. Their trading partner has finally arrived. Nomi begins to get a little nervous and whispers aloud only to herself that she is really not mentally ready for what is coming next. Latu notices her, waves his hand and calls, let her come to him by the door. He tells Nomi that he will leave the rest of the work to her, and she tries to stay calm and repeats to herself again and again, everything will be fine. At that very moment, elder dwarves enter the hall with heavy boxes of raw stones, and Nomi cannot help but stare, her eyes widen as if she sees something very dangerous. She looks at them carefully and realizes these are not the guys from her old village, and she immediately feels much calmer. One of the merchants sets the boxes on the ground and addresses Aquarin. He is counting on her again, let her take everything under control. Aquarin simply gives him a confident smile and replies that he can rely on her, let him leave everything to her. Latu looks away to the side and asks what they are actually doing, and Nomi honestly admits she was just thinking the same thing herself. Nomi suspects that this is a test of the magical stone's value, and Aquarin explains she needs to examine the quality and specific property of each stone. She adds that the tools can measure power, but checking characteristics and polishing requires a truly skilled eye. Nomi says that reaching a truly high level requires a lot of practice and time. One of the merchants tells Aquarin that she definitely has a magical stone eye for appraisal, while Nomi just stands nearby, silently impressed. Latu says that he can make such appraisals with just one glance, and Nomi adds, even among dwarves, almost no one is capable of that. Latu considers that having her is an incredibly useful skill. The merchant looks at the stone and admits the quality is actually quite good. Aquarin asks if the usual price suits her, and the seller confirms, yes, everything is okay, though there is one but. And before they could finish speaking, he immediately tells her that he has one quick question. Aquarin replies that she is currently looking for items marked Dawnstone and Darkrock and asks directly if they sell those. The boy explains mostly they handle the transportation part, so they don't know much about specific stones. He adds supposedly this is a workshop focused solely on magical stones, so they don't deal with other things. Aquarin checks his claped with notes and says he is not surprised by the answer, he has heard the same everywhere possible. She hands him a receipt for the deposit, let him exchange it for cash at the vault, and adds how highly she values their stable quality. The merchant takes the paper and casually replies that such a level of work is normal for them. Suddenly a click goes off in his head and he realizes that he heard that the guys from Dasadasa village made a big fuss because their trade was cut, so he asks if it is really true. Nomi freezes on the spot as soon as she hears the name of her old home. She barely utters the words, and Latu just stands there, unable to understand why she suddenly behaves so strangely. Aquarin falls silent for a moment before pronouncing the name of the place in question. She explains they were not actually cut off, they just lowered the price because the quality dropped and they behaved rudely. And still Nomi cannot believe that they even dared to try to sell such a thing from the very beginning. Aquarin keeps venting, insisting that the village was not that great after all. They say they were just doing them a favor because their work used to be decent. But now, with the quality fallen, everything they do is completely useless. The manager just listens and nods, saying they can do nothing about it. Latu notices that Nomi is completely out of sorts and asks if she is okay, but she just stands and trembles, unable to stop thinking about what people are doing at home right now. Latu decides it's time to move on and says they better leave after all, they have a break anyway. Nomi barely responds as he leads her away from the counter. Aquarin finally gets a good look at Nomi's face and realizes something very serious is happening to her. Latu tells Nomi that she is too pale, so she should just sit down and stop twitching. There is still plenty of time until the next deal, so she should relax and drink some tea. Nomi nods with trembling hands and thanks him, then places a warm drink in front of her, though her thoughts are still stuck on that conversation. She lifts her eyes from the cup and asks, is it true that they just mentioned the name of her old village? Aquarin sits down looking impressed and asks Nomi if she really knows anything about a place like the village Dacidas. Nomi looks at her tea and finally admits, actually she lived there until very recently, so when she heard that name, it immediately threw her off balance. Lachelin says he is on the case and that he has already heard bad rumors about Nomi's old settlement. Supposedly, the quality of their deliveries has completely plummeted lately. Aquarin rushes in to take his side and immediately announces, both the magical stones and the crafted items they have been sending are now essentially junk. But a second later she softens her tone, quiets down, and looks more closely. She invades Nomi's personal space, looks her straight in the eyes, and asks when exactly she first appeared in the castle. Nomi looks very scared under such sudden pressure and replies that only about a month has passed since she started. Aquarin freezes for a moment, quickly considers what she heard, and then says she understands the situation and relaxes back in her chair. The mood switches back to work. She asks Nomi if they will continue talking about those magical stones she inquired about. She breaks it down. Even if Nomi had heard about the trade before, the truth is that in the stone masonry business no one has heard of the Dawn Stone. Nomi tries to bring everything to light. The stones were sold in a jewelry shop back in the Dwarven Kingdom, but there is a reason why there were and still are so few of them. She notes that the stones have almost no practical use, so miners don't bother and don't pull many of them from underground. Aquarin leans back and lets out a heavy sigh. Finally, it becomes clear why this stone is so hard to find, and Nomi just sits and waits to see what she will say next. Aquarin says since she herself manages the magical stones, almost everything related to stones in the Demon Lord's domain sooner or later passes through her hands, but Still, she needs to ask Nomi, has she ever seen anything like this particular stone at all? Nomi holds her gaze for a second and immediately understands. If it's so hard to find, maybe she will have to go out and get it herself. Just then Ladu lights up and shouts that he just came up with the perfect idea. He points at her with his finger and grins, as if all that remains is to move together in the next 4 Heavenly Kings patrol. Turns out this patrol is no small matter for the Demon Kingdom, where every month one of the 4 Celestial Lords visits the army fortresses and camps to keep monsters in check and closely watch bandits or other countries. And this is yet another usual part of the job, to appear in person and raise the fighters' morale while they are there. Suddenly a sharp turn. Aquarin glances at Nomi with a frightened face and asks if she feels nauseous in the carriage or if everything is fine. But Nomi just pulls herself together and says that she is fine. Nomi says she was fine even when they were fleeing from her village, so it turns out she is just skilled with carriages. But Aquarin did not accept the news. He called the whole story terrible. She gets even more worked up and, unable to believe it, throws out, they really would have driven out a little child like Nomi. But immediately adds, Nomi will honestly be much better off if she leaves a place like the village Dasadasa behind. While the carriage rolls on, Aquarin explains, Lil Company, the largest in the kingdom, has already cut all ties with the village. And since even small traders responded, she is almost certain, very soon this place will turn into a ghost town. Nomi just looks somewhere aside and quietly, again and again, whispers to herself, ghost town. I think that the small village is essentially one big workshop, so everyone will have to leave and look for work elsewhere. She says that she doesn't have that many good memories, but it's still the place where she grew up. Both her parents' house and the grave are still there, so they both, sitting in silence, just quietly travel. Aquarin leaned back in the carriage and admitted, although everything was difficult, leaving that village was probably the best decision. And she immediately adds, Nomi won't be able to leave this place without feeling emptiness. After all, it was her home. Nomi stretches a wide, sincere smile and says she is infinitely grateful to everyone in Demon King's castle, and definitely thanks Aquarin. Which immediately excites Aquarin as soon as she shouts, as if she has a great idea, leaving Nomi momentarily confused. She steers the conversation to the fact that Nomi is supposedly a brilliant craftswoman, so she asks, does that mean she is equally skilled at extracting materials? As soon as Nomi manages to answer, Aquarin informs her that she has to study appraisal, take over the trading world, and become Chief Magic Stone Officer. Because with a true colleague nearby, life would be much easier for her. Just the thought of these matters and trade makes Nomi's head spin. She barely utters the words. She cries a little and says she would really like to skip the trading part, and Quiring just laughs and waves it off as nothing. They move on and finally reach their destination in MT. Mac and Nomi looks out at the mountains and realizes this is where they will camp. Aquarin checks his own notes and says that they are very close to North Mountain, not so far from the capital. But due to the high concentration of magic in these places, the beasts become quite strong until someone raises a cry. The guard in uniform salutes and reports that Lotto briefly informed him about the situation. Nomi politely thanks him for the help. Showing the girls the supplies he dropped from the cart, the guard adds that he leaves the rest to them. He sets off to join his unit, leaving the 2 of them alone to set up camp. Nomi begins to look a little tense and finally admits that she has actually never set up a tent. Then she turns to her companion for a hint, hoping that Aquari knows what she is doing. Aquari just gives a big wink and laughs it off, saying that she also has no idea how to do it. Nomi just holds her head in her hands and, as if seriously, begins to think that this whole journey was doomed from the very start. But she still tries her best, trying to understand. Is it enough just to put up the pole and then throw the fabric over it? Nomi tries to figure out the plan for the tent, suggests folding the fabric into a pile and laying out the bottom. The whole structure just collapses on them, and Nomi screams as the fabric covers and hides her underneath. The guard rushes headlong to check on them, asks if she is okay, and Nomi keeps lying that she is completely fine. Though she starts bowing and apologizing incessantly, and the guard just laughs and says that he is pleased they are safe. When everything finally settles down, Aquarin admits she thought she would do much better with this, and Nomi can only sigh and agree. She honestly admits she did not expect even such a simple thing as a tent turns into a real struggle. They finally go inside, and Nomi feels the floor seems like bare earth, and Aquarin agrees it is barely better than sleeping just outside. But Nomi decides since the base is finally built, they should at least try to start dinner. Although she knows how to cook, she has never had to try making a real dish in the middle of nowhere. Aquarin simply gives her a dazzling smile and admits that she does not cook at all at home, and Nomi is stunned by the girl's frankness. Nomi looked at Aquarin and said that she noticed something back when they were struggling with the tent. Despite all the mess, the girl had some incredible, wild elegance. While they are talking, a voice outside the tent interrupts them. The guard in uniform asks for permission to enter. He appears with a big smile, waves to the girls, and says they did a good job today. He could not resist teasing Nomi, hinting that her earlier scream really echoed around, and because of this, Nomi blushes brightly and moos with embarrassment. Then he puts the food on the table and explains that these are their dry rations with meat. He shows a mixture of beef, game, and even a bit of boar. Nomi looks down at the pile of meat. Her face is completely blank, and she asks if this is really all they have for dinner today. The guard only smiles slyly and pulls out the rest, saying they still have hardtack and a bottle of wine, so everything can be properly finished. Nomi is still a bit confused, so she asks if they are not going to light a fire at all to cook hot food, but the guard shrugs and waves it off. There is no mess crew nearby, so everyone manages with these simple rations. He says honestly they usually don't bother putting out fires in such hellish conditions, so Nomi can only nod when she realizes how they manage all this in the field. The uniformed guard waves to the girls as he walks away and suggests, "Enjoy your meal." Leaving Nomi and Aquarin to watch over the pile of dried meat, they meanwhile sincerely thanked for the food. Nomi takes a piece and starts chewing, but it turns out to be much tougher than she expected. She struggles, muttering that the meat is as hard as stone and also too cold, neither edible nor enjoyable. Nomi shivers and says how cold it is here, so Aquarin guesses the wine was probably supposed to be served to warm them up, but Nomi immediately cuts that off, saying you can't do drunk mining when there's still a lot of work to do. Since drinking is no longer possible, Aquarin decides they will just have to move to warm up the body. Two of them start running in circles right in the camp, trying to warm up as best as they can. It looks so strange from afar that someone nearby wonders what kind of spell are they performing there. When they start moving on, Nomi is happy, finally ate, but Aquarin is not very sure that eating now is the best move. Aquarin lets out a quiet chuckle, and Nomi immediately reminds her, without official permission, it's still too early to start extraction. Nomi looks around, checking if they are in the right place, when a soldier nearby speaks. The jerky jolts during patrol feel completely different. The guard actually looks genuinely pleasantly surprised and says it's strange to have so many different kinds of food. Another one joins in and with special pride emphasizes that boar meat they eat is simply incredible. They are so happy that one of the guards can't hold back. He wishes the 4 heavenly kings would come every day just for this food. Nomi looks at their usual dishes and can't figure out how they even eat them when everyone is so excited about the rations, yet she straightens up and asks, "Give me a minute of your time." Eventually, she finds Sigris to thank him for all his hard work and for the help he gave her earlier. Sigris just waves it off with laughter and tells her not to worry about the small things. Although he admits living there is really much worse than in the castle, so he suggests she take it as a little rest. Nomi silently stared back and thought that such a vacation can only be spent in a very harsh style. Nomi raises her gaze and asks the guards if they can finally move and start digging. But the guard remains completely calm. He is sure that this was intended from the beginning, so he gives them the green light. He points on the map. Monsters should not be a problem just across the road, but still orders to stay inside the camp light, telling Nomi to shout as loudly as possible if something goes wrong, and she cheerfully promises to do it with lots of energy. Nomi happily announces that she is setting off, and Latu is seen in the background. He is barely holding on. With a completely empty look, he tells her to be careful in the wild wilderness. Nomi gives a nervous reply, and Lot, who looks as if he has fully resigned to life stress, seems to have taken him to the dark side. Aquarin watches him and says that he understands everything. This camp is much harsher than the life they had in the castle, but Nomi is ready to move on. Tell Aquarin that she can just stay at the headquarters if she wants, although Aquarin admits she would definitely prefer to skip it by joining the others. Nomi's eyes flash as soon as she adds another thought about why she so resolutely wants to finally start. Aquarin says that managing the stones in the Demon King's castle, she has also really become interested in mining, probably wants to go into the mines too. Nomi just looks at her and replies that she is just as dedicated to her work as before. Aquarin quickly apologizes for the formal conversation, and Nomi is momentarily confused by the sudden change in mood, but then Aquarin winks and admits that she actually wants Nomi to teach her how to dig so she can get rich quickly. Nomi can't help but still notices how honestly she speaks. Nomi gives her a stern look and says, indeed, however, she without a shadow of a doubt believes that the ground beneath them literally abounds with gold, silver, and all kinds of treasures. She tells Aquarin that they both need to do everything possible, and they set off, while Aquarin happily embraces the plan. Gnome pauses, bows to the stone wall, thanks Lord Gnome, and asks to share just a little of the earth's bounty with them today. Nomi tightly closes her eyes and orders herself to concentrate, trying to feel exactly the right spot while energy sparkles around her. But suddenly she jerks her gaze aside and tells Aquarin that she found something right there. Nomi tightens the battle chain to readiness and asks Aquarin to step back a little to make space. Then she sharply strikes the ground. The vibration rolls through the handle, and Nomi instantly understands the soil resonates completely, so they have hit exactly the right spot. Exactly, I will soon find a quality gnome trophy. Nomi cannot contain her excitement and says that this place is a real jackpot, laughing while thinking about what they will dig up there, and Aquarin is impressed by how reliable Nomi is, so she prepares her own magic. Aquarin tells Nomi that she will do everything possible to help as well, and the two of them start digging until a huge pile of shiny little stones grows on the tarpaulin. Nomi says that here they can extract a whole mountain of everything, and Aquarin agrees, quite surprised. They were just on the edge of the city and already find so much so easily. Nomi takes a piece and shows how magical stones and earth magic stones are mixed together in one block. And while this moment with quality looks simply wonderful, Nomi looks closely at the stone and begins to guess if there is something more in it. Aquarin takes a small tool and begins to process the rough stones they found, carefully. She cleans everything until she sees what is hidden beneath it, and tells Nomi that she is simply incredible for finding top-quality gems so quickly. She lifts the perfectly polished stone. It shines brightly shining. Nomi winks and says that these magical stones are simply a miracle, and wonders if the magic of this land is only very super dense. Aquarin is a bit confused, like everything was fine, they just looked, after which the jagged shine has already been removed. Nomi just brushes off with her usual OL, and Aquarin remains perplexed. How I manage. It works, 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 it works. I can. How are they so lucky? They don't stop searching and finding peat bog and the very same dawnstone they wanted, and something else from moonstones and royal stones too. Nomi adds that they even came across some amazonites. A radiant blue-green gemstone, perfect for jewelry. She begins to think that the Demon Kingdom actually has a bunch of crazy resources, until Aquarin realizes this can really only be studied in the field. Aquarin beams, looking at the pile of loot they gathered, and tells Nomi that such a catch really boosts her energy for more work. Nomi looks at her with a big smile and says everything is definitely going as it should, and while she says they need to keep going through the rocky ground, and that if they're lucky, they might even come across real high-end jewels. Later he starts showing signs of exhaustion. Aquarin throws out how much they've already dug, and Nomi can't help but agree, like they are really pro-grinding. Looking at the bag Aquarin shows, they pulled out only a tiny fraction of the needed dark rock, but along with such a stock of dawnstone and other gems, it's still an incredible success. Aquarin says she'll handle cleaning the raw materials herself even before they break everything into pieces. Nomi feels a bit sorry, and she asks if she very good that he took on this extra work. Aquarin does not resist at all, and with a big smile says to her, just translate this to her. Nomi begins to worry and happily thinks that reworking the lantern will now be very easy, so she thinks she can already start She polishes the stones right in the tent, but suddenly freezes in place as she looks around this cramped space. She rubs the back of her head. She finds her own awkwardness a bit funny because she completely forgot. In this cramped place, they have to sleep tonight. Naomi has completely erased from her mind everything that happened during the excavations, so she suggests a quick snack and going to sleep, and so they do. Aquarine thinks it's a great plan. They settled in the tent and are finishing their dinner. While Naomi grabs her lantern, she asks Aquarine if she can turn off the light. She looks a bit confused, and suddenly everything around plunges into complete darkness. It overwhelms her, and she awkwardly asks if it is already morning because nothing is visible. She is completely confused, feeling around to understand what is even happening. Until she realizes that Naomi is just standing there with the lantern. She asks how ordinary light could do that. Cause all that, Naomi explains it is actually a special lantern that creates darkness. With the dark stones that Aquarine helped find, they are looking for the right one. To block the light, Aquarine leans closer and, finally understanding why they need those stones, almost breaks off mid-word just sh. And she is honestly deeply impressed. She says she has no idea how it works, but the craftsmanship is on a completely different level. Compared to the works of the old master, she simply lights up and begs Naomi to make a dark lantern for her as well. Aquarine is trembling from the new lantern and asks if she can pay extra for it, but no. But Naomi objects. It is not needed at all, so Aquarine offers to pay her back with a drink later. Naomi says she actually likes that very much, laughs lightly, and the two finally settle down for the night, but even trying to fall asleep on the ground is much harder than it seems. Aquarine snorts that it hurts terribly, and she honestly cannot imagine how soldiers can endure such a life. She says they have no guards even sleep in their armor, and Naomi perfectly understands how invincible these guys are. Then Naomi's whole body starts trembling wildly, and she hoarsely asks if it is really winter because of this frosty air. But Aquarine reminds her of the months long gone, and only then does Naomi accept winter is over. And it is so. At night the mountains look exactly like that, leaving no. I feel very bad because no one told her that the temperature would drop so much. She curls up there, wraps herself up, and has no idea why she is still so cold even after getting herself a few more blankets. Naomi shudders as if she is shaking from the inside and wonders if training will help her cope with this, because this is far from just getting used to it. And while they both try to get comfortable, Aquarine calls her. Naomi responds briefly from somewhere under her pile of blankets. Aquarine looks around and asks if she can snuggle up to Naomi to warm up, but no. But Naomi starts blushing and admits, actually she also wanted to ask the same thing because she is cold too. Together they huddled under the blankets. The extra body heat is a real salvation for both, and when they get cozy, Aquarine remembers that she actually has mermaid blood. She quietly says, And he thinks she is so cool with the cold because of this, but in reality Aquarine wants everything to be moderate. Naomi looks extremely surprised as soon as she hears this. She only repeats and echoes the fact Aquarine comes from mermaids. Aquarine smiles and explains that since her father is a merman, she is a half-mermaid, and this leads to Naomi opens up herself. She tells Aquarine that she is actually a half-dwarf, sharing her own heritage while they talk. Naomi finally smiled. She felt calm enough to tell Aquarine that her father is actually a dwarf. Aquarine almost mechanically exhaled and let the thought slip. She had already suspected this a little because Naomi didn't really look like a dwarf, and then quickly added, sorry. She looked a little worried and whispered that Naomi probably hates it when people start talking about how she looks different. Naomi immediately jumps up, waving it off. She says that's not true at all. She lowers her gaze and admits, back then in the village, she was worried that she wouldn't be able to fit into the group, but she really doesn't worry anymore for some reason. This look immediately brings back a memory of her mother. Aquarine listens attentively and also slowly opens up, telling about her own life. She was the only one in her circle with a different hair color, so people used to say it was strange, and she smiles and replies that now she really is proud of it, because it's the same shade as her father's hair. Naomi looks at her with complete admiration and says that her ice blue hair is honestly just incredibly beautiful. Aquarine blushes and smiles sincerely, thanking Naomi for the kind words, but Naomi starts looking down at her own hands and thinking about where exactly she stands in all of this. Her thoughts again drift to the village. She remembers how she lived there before the memories returned, and everything was then a complete haze. She was always hiding under a hat in the Dwarven Kingdom because her father told her to. Turning her thoughts back, she suddenly realizes, in fact, she did not dislike her hair color. She hated how everyone treated her as if she were an outcast. Aquarine asks if she has finally coped with it, and Naomi admits, since she arrived in the kingdom, everything has changed, and she And she remembers how Medes told her that hiding such beautiful hair is a complete waste. Nomi runs her fingers through her long hair and replays everything that was said in her mind. She looked at Aquarin and asked if he thinks she can now truly be proud of her appearance. Aquarin does not even hesitate. He smiles in response and tells her that he is absolutely sure it will happen. Aquarin finishes the sentence and tells Nomi that her hair, which shines, is incredibly beautiful, and after a long silence, Nomi finally manages to whisper a sincere thank you. As soon as they settled under the blankets, Aquarin quietly whispers to Nomi good night, and they finally fall asleep completely relaxed. Later she wakes up. Nomi stretches widely to get the blood flowing again. She notices that her body aches a little, but this complete darkness helped her sleep so soundly that she actually feels quite well. Thinking about how soldiers usually have to sleep in harsh conditions and bright light burns everywhere. Nomi says that she is very pleased that they made those dark lanterns, while Aquarin stands nearby and lets out a huge yawn. Aquarin looks around with a smile and tells Nomi that it is a very nice evening. And Nomi smiles in response, agreeing, yes, it really is a nice evening, and for her too. The two of them share a quiet moment and decide both are already ready to move on. Nomi calls Sigra to get her attention, and Aquarin lets her know that they have finished digging and are finally heading back with the scent. Sigra just chuckles and says she understands, thanks both of them for putting so much effort into this work. Latu is not at all happy that they are leaving so early, shouting that it is absolutely unfair. Honestly, for a half-gnome who stayed under protection and a mermaid, camping was simply unreal. When they start to leave, Nomi lets out a tired sigh and says that her shoulders are already stiff. And Aquarin feels it too. The body feels as if filled with weight, even though she slept. Nomi, however, would like the camp to be a bit cozier. Nomi realizes that there is still some time before their trip, so she suggests eating a snack that the chef packed, and this moment allows Aquarin, who catches this off guard, to ask if Nomi has actually been hiding something all this time. The treat is just too tasty. Aquarin teases her for being so cunning, and Nomi just laughs in response and jokingly waves off with a classic phrase, supposedly you have to do what the locals do. And as soon as Nomi takes out the treat, she says to Aquarin, come on, taste it, jokingly, which actually bribes Aquarin to keep her mouth shut. Nomi pulls out a loaf of dark bread stuffed with dried fruits, and it looks almost unbelievable. As soon as Aquarin takes a bite, she immediately recognizes this is exactly the special kind they serve. She returned to the dining hall. Nomi is almost choking with emotion when she says it's just a piece of bread. How can it bring so much joy, especially with that sweet tart fruit mixture that pairs perfectly with cheese or wine? She chews nonstop, thinking this is the best snack during a walk through the field while a cool breeze blows on the face. Nomi says she gets goosebumps wanting to jump into the bath as soon as they arrive. She flew home, but Aquarin stopped her, said she heard there is a bathhouse in the castle. Right now it's actually broken. Before Nomi could react, Aquarin suddenly starts screaming, calling her. Look outside as someone nearby is hurriedly checking a wooden pole. Nomi begins to tear the bread. She lunges at it and mumbles that it's time to eat, but she barely manages to catch the moment and enjoy it when she immediately notices something moving. Gaining speed, he rushes. Aquarin shouts for Nomi to take cover. The shadow of Divi's right at her. Nomi screams in complete shock, throwing herself backward along with she. She realizes it's a crow. Panic overwhelms her. Nomi starts shouting that it's her natural enemy. While her snack falls right into the mud, she releases her heart. Heartbroken cry, and she understood. The bird had been aiming at her food the whole time. The whole time, she jerks and pulls back, telling the bird that there is no chance that she lay. Elises dashes forward to snatch this fluffy thing. He picks it up and looks closely, as if it really turns out very tasty, and there is something warm, a little nostalgic in it. Nomi begins to remember the days when she dug in the forest with her dad. I remember how she used to set all kinds of traps to catch birds for dinner, so she laughs and tells the bird that chasing after its bread was a deadly mistake she already has. The bird gets caught in a trap and says that it will regret very, very much having gotten involved with her. The bird starts losing control and flails, flapping its wings chaotically, while Aquarin rushes forward and asks if Nomi is even okay. However, she suddenly stops and freezes in place with a completely bewildered expression on her face. She looks closer and asks if it really isn't a bird hiding under the cloud. Nomi is holding it. She explains that they are usually incredibly shy and fly away so fast that she can't believe it. Nomi caught one with her bare hands. Nomi just smiles indulgently and says it's karma because that bird was greedy and tried to steal her lunch. Then Aquarin gets excited and declares that it's actually a phantom gourmet bird. It's so rare and the meat is just top tier, so Nomi decides it will be the perfect gift for Mr. Maikari in the kitchen. Aquarin cuts off her speech to explain the other side of the bird, but Nomi just stands and watches. She's completely lost track while Aquarin recalls that these birds can become familiars if properly trained. Make me look down at this round little creature and ask what a familiar is. Aquarin realizes Nomi probably doesn't know, so she explains they're animals, those that obey their master's commands, and she asks if she remembers the crows in the castle, and Nomi immediately understands that it is about those used by Lady Medes. Nomi gazes at the tiny bird in her hands, doubting that such a delicate creature could perform any deed at all. She is minding her own business, but the little bird suddenly flaps its wings wildly right in her face until Nomi orders it to stop immediately. Aquarin leans over and asks Nomi to give her a second, reaching out her hand to the bird. To quickly pronounce the spell, she declares she managed to bind Nomi's magic to the bird using a chain. She finishes by telling Nomi that as long as she uses her magic and gives a command, the bird will be forced to obey her. Nomi looks down at the bird in her hands, completely stunned by the magic she sees. She admits this is truly magic, and Aquarin explains that this is just a basic spell for magical manipulation. She tells Nomi controlling familiars is a usual thing for Imagine, so she encourages Nomi to try, give the bird a command. No special magic is needed, it should just work like that. Aquarin reassures her once released the bird will still return when called, but Nomi is still way too nervous. She wonders if she should do everything the same way as with polishing stones, and then whispers to the bird, "You may go." She lets it fly into the sky, but as soon as she calls it to return, it instantly twists right in her face, and this completely throws her off balance. Nomi could not believe it really worked. She realized the bird was called again right onto her hand. Aquarin says that this is the special trait of the bird, that's why it is so hard to catch, because it can resort to spatial magic. And then she adds, if Nomi trains properly, he will even be able to deliver letters to her. Nomi quietly laughed, looking at the tiny creature, and told it that it was actually surprisingly smart. Nomi thinks to herself, at first she considered either to sell the bird or even eat it, but as soon as she figured out how everything works, it suddenly seems quite useful and even starts to look as if this little one might actually be cute. Nomi asks Aquarin if they will need a cage for the bird, and if it is even allowed to keep pets in the dormitory. Aquarin pauses, thinks it over, and says that since it is a familiar cage, probably not necessary. She explains crows in her place just wander around when they are not needed, and since people use them for messages, then supposedly it is not such a problem. Nomi says she understands. Nomi understands these little birds are a usual part of life in the castle. She believes that if he has other bird friends, then loneliness will not catch up. Watching the bird, Nomi runs through the name of its species in her head, and suddenly it dawns on her. Kuchin does not fit the mood she wants at all. She starts looking for another and decides, from now on she will call it Birdkey. Nomi says to the bird, promising it a new name, and adds, "Nice to meet you." The bird immediately starts chirping in response, and Nomi just giggles, telling the little one that he is so adorably ugly that she simply can't help but love him. Nomi watches as her new bird friend settles in and thinks they have just found a new roommate or just a very good acquaintance. For this place, it's really a cool addition. She sits down at the table to relax, runs through the journey in her head, and realizes, after such a long break, working on site turned out to be pure bliss. But then, holding the cup, Nomi exhales heavily, and the fatigue from the whole trip finally begins to wash over her in waves. Nomi looked completely exhausted and honestly admitted to herself, spending the night in the wild turned out to be much harder than she had ever imagined. She couldn't stop thinking about how terrible the conditions were. The cold had frozen her to the bone, and the ground was incredibly hard and rough, so sleeping on it was simply impossible. And to make things worse, she remembers how she and Aquarin had to choke down food as cold and hard as the dirt they were sitting on. She understands simply, if she continues to scout the mine from this point on, the best option is a short, one-day trip. Then her thoughts jump to the guys, to Laddie and the other Celestial Kings, who have to go on long patrols. She thinks about how these soldiers and commanders like Sigris are stuck in those harsh camps without any comfort that she has here. Standing there with her drink, Nomi decides she wants to find a way to make their lives a little better, even if she can only improve it just a little bit. Nomi notes the soldiers seem to tolerate the cold normally, while she herself is planning to establish mass production of these dark lanterns. If only everyone got their own, she hopes this will finally help them sleep at least a little normally. She decided that the lighting issue has already been resolved, so now only dealing with remains food, which she understands as a huge problem, while trying to push her own portion through herself. Rations are just cold dried meat and hard crackers, so tough that they need to be softened in the mouth before eating. Even anyone can chew this and make her worry. Supposedly, the guys won't have the strength to fight if they are on such a diet. She convinces herself that nothing compares to how something hot warms the body from the inside out, and remembers electric kettles from her past life. This detail gives her a sudden idea, and she sharply moves to action, and she understands the castle already uses a kettle, and it is generally much more convenient than it could be. She recalls baths where magical stones instantly heat water, and knows she can use this technology. Nomi hypes herself up and confidently decides she will move forward with this new idea. She says goodbye to her bird. Clow says she is going to work and asks to visit the workshop later for a snack. As soon as she steps out, thoughts start swirling in her head, 2 different ways to actually assemble a cooking pod. There is casting, simply pouring molten metal into a mold, and forging when the metal is hammered with a hammer. Clatter of the hammer on the metal blank, and she notices a small press nearby in the workshop. Since she wants to mass produce them and make them as light as possible, first of all she decides to take on the forging method. She sits down to think through the structure and thinks, probably best to have separate switches for the fire and water stones. Then people could take ordinary water if they want, or use the fireside to roast meat. They could even first fry the food, then add water, and the whole process becomes much more convenient, like a deep hot stove that also handles water. Just the thought of it makes her eyes light up. Nomi sketches a 2-level design so the magic stone and circuit boards don't get mixed up, then maintenance later will be much easier. She thinks about putting the switch outside, but is still trying to find the best way to do it exactly. Controlling the control elements, she thinks maybe it's worth putting a volume regulator so people have precise control over water and heating. The design finally looks ready, and Nomi raises a wave. Time to start on the prototype. She loudly exclaims that she can't wait to assemble it, and her little bird watches as she gets to work. But everything went off plan. Nomi hovered over the table and groaned because she was so sure that it would have worked. The pot turned out wonderful and the mechanism was perfect, but it still jammed her because right in front of her a prototype, and it has a serious problem. It turned out that the dial switch was a real nightmare. The point where both water and fire work correctly is so narrow that it's simply impossible to hit correct setting. She decides to tweak the output through the wiring and use a simple on-off switch. Nomi lets out a deep sigh. Sadness immediately washes over her like a wave because the adjustment switch she worked so hard on simply didn't work, and so she tries to look on the bright side and whispers to herself that keeping the design simple is the right move. She thinks this way fewer materials will be used and the entire production chain will go faster, and besides, it is. The repair will indeed be much easier if it breaks. When you try to make everything too complicated, repair turns into a complete headache. Although her first idea was cool, Nomi realizes she has to let it go and refocuses on the pot in front of her. She replaces the dial with a button switch and immediately understands. This way it will be turned on accidentally less often. She lifts the finished product high and smiles so widely that she can't hold back and decides to call it Magic Stone Pot just as it is finally ready. Done. Nomi, thrilled with her new invention, rushes through the corridors, desperately eager to find someone to show it to. She heads to the dining hall thinking someone is stealing a midnight snack, and when she peeks inside she notices the Prime Minister and calls Mateys, completely relaxed as if she has finally found the founder. Nomi peeked into the dining room and asked if she could come in. Mateys gave permission and Mr. Makari shouted a greeting friendly just before. The chef started feverishly praising his tonkatsu noodle soup, saying it's a real hit and already half the visitors ordered it today. Nomi broke into a wide smile and said she was simply incredibly glad. The recipe suited everyone's tastes, but just as she says this, her stomach growled loudly and she had to admit, talking about food made her hunger even stronger. Mr. Makari says he will go prepare food for her, orders her to wait right here, and Nomi thanks him for such kindness. As soon as the cook leaves, Mitty glances sideways at her. Nomi notices this and immediately catches the girl's attention because the Prime Minister doesn't seem to be in a hurry. She just looks at the object in her hands and asks what kind of pot it is, and this reminds Nomi why she ran away. She ran there immediately, explaining that she had already made the magic stone pot before reaching out and pressing the new button. Nomi shows how water pours directly from the pot and automatically heats itself, a real breakthrough moment for You can cook anywhere. Medes looks truly impressed, says how convenient it is to heat food without lighting a fire. Nomi is now in full excitement and tells Medes that with this pot you don't even need to bring water anymore. She already imagines drinking tea anywhere, and asks if this isn't the most convenient thing in the world, and Medes just looks at her with a rather uncertain expression and only gives a weighty, hesitant, "She probably is right." Nomi is a bit confused by the strange atmosphere until the Prime Minister raises a finger and casually swirls water in the air. Nomi completely loses control because she suddenly realizes she forgot that Medes can simply create water from the air with magic, and she immediately feels her little invention seems a bit unnecessary for a moment. Just then Mr. Makari returns with a tray and announces that the food is ready, but he gets stuck. He freezes in place as soon as he sees the magical stone cauldron. He is bursting. He can produce water himself, and Nomi calls it incredibly useful. Then Nomi explains it's all thanks to the water magic stone she put inside. The cook says it excites her even more. Not every demon can really control water, so such a tool is a huge help in the kitchen. It doesn't lead to. She explains that she knows me, and I immediately understood. She might have underestimated her own work. She honestly says she barely understands how magic works for everyone in this kingdom, so to me. Sao moves closer to Medi, presses her to herself and reassures confusion is completely normal. She adds that magic is as foreign to Medi as Nomi's crafting skills are to demons. And indeed, demons are born with the same sharpness when it comes to magic, but there is a trick in how it all works because they can't just take any element they want. It all comes down to their family history and personal traits. Because of this, most people are actually stuck with only one specific type. Mr. Makari explains, in fact, he is a fire mage. He says that most guys who haul work in the kitchen skillfully control the flame, but only a few can handle water. The chef, with a proud expression, points to himself and declares that it is absolutely obvious. The right person in the right position, so everyone considers Medes to be so special. And she is exactly what is called a hydrojet mage, an incredibly rare type who can control both water and wind simultaneously. Nomi is completely stunned. She watches as the butchers adjust her monocle while she thinks about how incredible the Prime Minister is, and then Nomi remembers something and asks a question. She says that Medes used to shoot lightning, so she wonders does this really mean that she is not actually a lightning mage? The room becomes quiet as soon as Medes says this, and the chef just freezes in place. He looks at her with an empty, expressionless gaze. Nomi cannot help but feel that something strange has just been said. Medes finally breaks the silence and explains, lightning is just a combination of water and wind. Nomi explodes and suddenly realizes that the science here is the same as in the human world. Here Nomi has another idea. She asks the chef if a fire mage like him is unable to heat everything, because of which he. Mr. Makari pauses for a moment to gather his thoughts. He admits maybe there really is no separate magical spell that only heats, because even if he could definitely heat a bit of water by throwing a fireball there still would be no chance to set the temperature perfectly by doing it exactly that way. Nomi begins to understand how exactly this type of fire magic should work. Medes notices the changes and immediately points out the water finally starts boiling in the cauldron. She looks impressed and says that this new feature invented by Nomi is actually very cool. Then they will finally be able to drink warm tea while working in the office. Mr. Makari intervenes and states that having water at hand like this is a real lifesaver, so he would take one. For the reception, Nomi thinks that a pot in the office looks strange and decides the next will be a kettle. Glancing at the food on the table, someone suddenly realizes it has been sitting unused for a long time. The chef looks a bit guilty, apologizes because he got so carried away with the conversation that the dish had time to cool down. Nomi is struck by an idea and says, let them just put the food in a cauldron to heat it up. That way everyone can properly enjoy their dish while it is still steaming hot. The chef looks as if a light bulb just went off in his head. He says to Nomi if she can really do that, it would be the perfect presentation for the same stew or fondue. Nomi bursts with enthusiasm and declares that it sounds like a brilliant idea. He enters with heavy steps and suggests starting with something simple, removing the water from the bowl. Nomi just says, agreed. Then Medes uses magic and lifts the liquid straight from the bowl, and as soon as it reaches the right temperature, the food immediately starts to steam. Nomi finally takes a big bite and cannot hold back a joyful sound. She beams as she says the dish is finally steaming hot and incredibly tasty, and because of that everything is so To feel that pure bliss again, as if returning to warmth, she is so satisfied and jokes, saying the steam tastes good, but then sh. Then she thinks a little and says she truly wants them to find a way to deliver this hot food to the camp workers as well. Midis realizes that Nomi simply dropped out to the camp and thanks her for working so hard, even though she reminds her that the rations for the workers have really become much better than before. The demon lord actually started everything with small things. He brought dried meat products and even made sure they were seasoned with spices and various seasonings to make it tastier. Nomi remembers the meat was quite tough to chew, but the taste was really very good. Oh, what a great activity this is. She would gladly just gnaw on something there with a glass of wine, sitting in a warm room. Nomi says that the meat eaters eat as if the soldiers really madly love this food, and the word meat eaters sounds a bit surprised when she asks if it's true. Meat figures are probably logical. Until Nomi appeared, they had only one option: pork, salted and dried so much that it simply aged. And when she hears this, Nomi worries so much for them that tears come to her eyes and she immediately says she might cry any moment. She bites off a piece of her food and thinks how strange this tough meat and hard crackers once turned out to be the better version of that ration. Now she can make hot water whenever she wants, but spending so much time and effort to cook every meal is a constant headache. So she begins to beg that things like cup noodles or instant ramen exist in this world because nothing compares to convenience. You just pour hot water and a hot bowl of ramen is ready. Nomi starts to remember how in her old world they made not fried noodles. Heated air was blown through to dry them. She thinks dried vegetables work on the same principle. And suddenly everything falls into place. If she evaporates the water from the soup, then the salt and that thick, rich flavor should turn into crystals. A determined sparkle flashes in her eyes and Nomi makes a decision. They must find a way to extract the water. Because drying something is essentially just getting rid of moisture. Nomi realizes here it is the perfect solution. She quickly reaches out to me and exclaims, "Medes." She asks if she can use that water-draining magic from before from this bowl of noodles. Medes looks a little confused and asks how much water she should remove. Maybe she just needs to thicken the broth a little. Nomi Object says that this is not true at all and asks to forget the idea of simply boiling broth in a cauldron. She insists that I use her magic and dry every drop of moisture from the noodles and all the ingredients. Medes freezes quietly for a few seconds until someone shouts somewhere, "Nomi." And the cook immediately starts to panic, shouts that this will make the dish completely inedible. Medes admits she can handle it, but she is not okay at all. She is sure tricks that cause harm are just a waste of effort, especially when they spoil normal food like this. Nomi clenches her hands and begins to beg, apologizing for the crazy request but still asks, just believe her. Medes throws a tired look and says that she is still against this idea, but since Nomi is so stubborn, she will try. She snaps her fingers and all the water instantly flies off the bowl, as if it was never there. The noodles turn into a solid briquette. Nomi beams upon seeing the result and insists that this is truly perfect. She lifts the bowl, beams with a big smile, and explains, this way they will finally be able to deliver warm food to the camp. They just stand in place and look completely confused by her plan. Meanwhile, Ladu sits idly and is bored. He sighs heavily and thinks that a whole week has passed since the day Nomi and the others left. Ladu slouches in the bushes near the camp and thinks about how it could be he is already used to this life, ever since he climbed the stairs up. Continuous pain, still he can't stand it and starts shouting that Nomi is being treated unfairly because they need to return to the castle before he gets stuck here. He dreams of a warm cafeteria and when they were sitting, deliciously eating meat together with me, the guard suddenly ran up and shouting, called after him in Sigrise. Ladu jerks out of the delirium and shifts his gaze to where the commotion is rising. Sigris simply falls out of the tree right in front of them and asks what all the fuss is about, completely scaring the guard. The guard catches his breath and reports that supplies have arrived, just brought from the castle. Sigris thinks probably Nomi sent them something handmade, but looking at the strange object in his hand, has no clue what it is supposed to be. Ladu throws out an idea to check and sees there is a pot and a letter. He begins to read it aloud. Nomi sent a message thanking everyone for their hard work and hoping that this new invention will help them. Latu starts following the instructions from the letter, sets up the cauldron and unwraps the package to pour dried noodles inside. Sigra watches this with a suspicious look and asks if this is. It seems like it will really work, but Ladu just says that it smells wonderful to him while he turns on the water switch. Sigris is completely stunned that water flows just like that for everyone. Then Latu turns on the main power button and says they just need to wait, while the cauldron heats up. Sigray catches the smell but loses the trail, and Ladu orders him. Calm down because it's not even ready yet, he explains. As soon as the pork becomes tender, you just turn it off and let it sit. Sigray can't believe his eyes and shouts, asking why. In the camp in the middle of the lot, there is a dance-quality ramen. Whoever comes in just laughs and says that the pot did everything by itself, and Aquaring stands nearby and doesn't understand what ramen is. Latu notices the rest of the team and calls them, saying they appeared just at the best moment. He gives them a gear and tells the girls, the recipe is right there in the letter, so just follow it. Latu says they can just serve it straight from the pot, and Sigrid gets interested. But Latu quickly orders Sigrid to make his own batch, because this one belongs to him, and the giant groans in pain. At that very moment, one of the girls calls Ladu and he catches her voice, distracted just as she. While she looks at her food in complete stupor, she says that she really cooked it herself, although she was sure. In the kitchen, she is a complete disaster. She gets so carried away that she calls the cauldron magic, and it really throws Ladu off track. Nomi hears her and smiles, thinking about how much she wants the senior master to hear people talk about his work like this. The girl gathers everyone around while Ladu warns, start eating quickly so the noodles don't get soggy. Finally, Sigrid gets his own station in order and asks Ladu, has he already poured enough water into the cauldron? Ladu calls Ladu to attention, reproaches the cigarettes for lowering the water level, and shows 80 is definitely not half empty. Sigrid just collapses and repeats this number to himself over and over, and Ladu realizes this giant is much clumsier than he seems. Having hung up his appetite and decided that it's finally time to eat, Latu lowers his gaze to his bowl with a huge smile and clasps his palms together, thanking for the food, ready to dive into the meal right now. He wildly slurps the noodles, his face turning red. The hot dish really turns out to be too delicious. Having finished the whole bowl in a record short time, he licks his lips and lets out a long, satisfied sigh. Sitting there, he gradually reproaches himself for Nomi and thinks, it's a pity that he once decided that she was acting unfairly. He suddenly realizes, all this time she was working with all her might, and a genuine smile appears on his face by itself. It tastes just a hit, and Ladu thinks about how these noodles compare without any difficulty to those served in the castle. Nomi looked at him with a proud expression and declared that she actually sees all the efforts he made to make it happen. Ladu pauses to breathe in. The heat finally overwhelms him from the food while he understands, although it is getting colder as they approach North Mountain, he did not even notice it. How deeply that cold had bitten into the bone until he suddenly realized what a huge happiness warm food is. He clasps his hands to thank for the food and looks completely restored and thinks he would never have expected that a simple camp dish could be so tasty, but at that very moment while he remembers that he wants to drink to complement the night, a messenger bursts into the hall and, tearing the silence, shouts, immediately pay attention to him. The guard reports the second patrol team noticed a huge stone bird flying straight at them from the southern side. Sigrid looks impressed by the news and the thought immediately sinks into her head. A bird of that size is really quite a catch. Ladu sets the tone a bit, grumbling that the monster completely destroys his peace after eating. Sigrid just shrugged off and grabbed his weapon, throwing out, fight the best way to work off lunch. Sigrid says since the noodles were so tasty, he will return with this catch intact as thanks, and Ladu is all for quickly finishing this, so he asks. Sigrid gives the order for everyone to prepare for battle, and the whole squad salutes in response, ready to jump into action together. Ladu watches as the giant stone bird rises and flies straight to where they were waiting for it, and recounts how they managed to lure it out. Sigrise takes the initiative first and shouts for the first strike, ordering the team to unleash stone arrows without restraint. All the guards focus their power and unleash a barrage of magic. Latu leads the attack while they shoot the giant bird from all sides. Latu actually holds his breath moved. He says the rapid-fire magic is simply incredible, and the bird just takes the heavy blows. Sigrid doesn't give the monster a second to rest and immediately calls for reinforcements, ordering the team to strike with wave blade at once. As soon as the magic connects, Sigrid lets out a loud scream and breaks the target through with such force that the clash ends immediately. Ladu watches as the giant bird finally falls and calmly says, it's all finally over. Ladu calls Sigrid to check the result, and Sigrid simply shouts back, excited, glowing, because they brought everything to a smooth finish. Sigrid stands over the huge bird and lets out a long sigh. He, as it turns out, is a bit confused and asks if that thing was just weak because it didn't put up any resistance at all. Ladu examines her and shows, by size this bird looked much bigger than usual. Standing still and replaying the fight in his head, he begins to understand one thing. He says that today his magic felt noticeably smoother, and the stone arrows flew much faster and hit more accurately than usual. Ladu says that his whole body became super light, and Sigri immediately starts warming up, admitting he feels the same. Sigri wonders if there is really something special about this day, and at that very moment he is suddenly enlightened. He asks if all this extra power actually originates from those tenkatsu udons they ate for lunch. Sigris calls the squad and gives the order, drain the blood and load the bird onto the cart for the castle. The guards are fully on board. They say they will handle everything carefully, as thanks for the wonderful dinner, and set off to finish the job. Sigri laughs loudly and tells Ladu that they really owe everything to this little lady. Ladu nods, agreeing that he is absolutely right, and whispers barely audible the name Nomi. He will still think about whether this whole crazy recharge is just the power of warm food, and does not believe it can be underestimated. Ladu stands looking grateful, thanks Nomi in his thoughts, and calls her back chief crafter. Returning to the castle, Midas takes up the food, takes a bite, and even shouts that the dish is incredibly delicious. She is completely stunned by the taste, even emphasizes how wonderful it is, although she says this without taking her eyes off it. He looked intently at her bowl. What at first seemed like hard crackers suddenly became so soft and warm, and it is impressive. She glances at her table and realizes this form is perfect to keep her at work. She holds the bowl high. She is delighted. Nomi created something with a long shelf life and wonderful taste. Eddies looks at the dish with stars in her eyes and says it is flawless in every way. Nomi warns the demon mistress the soup can splash and then all her important documents will be ruined, so she suggests a quick break to eat. Because the Lord is always stuck in her office and eats nothing but boring dried meat, Nomi knew a real dish will support her. And the way Nomi sees that she likes it so much makes the mistress hope that the new dish will remain useful to her for a long time. From the very day those dried soup noodles were first made, they have tirelessly worked to make them easier to carry and store. Or keep the recipe simple but verify the cooking time, Nomi teamed up with Mr. Makari to figure out the packaging. They choose special mukina leaves from the mountains. People have been using them to wrap food for many years. These leaves keep everything fresh, and a bit of magic makes them perfect for vacuum sealing food. Nomi had water mages in the kitchen. They helped with the noodles whenever there was a free moment, but the attempts to gather everyone in the camp turned into a huge job that started and didn't stop. Stuck in the daily routine, Nomi simply took it upon herself to craft her own drying oven to speed things up. Nomi looks back at her process and remembers trying to dry with water magic stones, but it was too slow, so she changed the game, assembled a new system combining a neutral magic stone with a special drying comb she found in her magic book. The run with Chef Makari goes perfectly. The taste just hits the mark, and they celebrate the grand success of their new recipe. And that means the production line for mass release is finally complete. Nomi lifts the finished product, excited because everything is ready to start. But she didn't stop, equipped a large drum with a drying board to process all leftover bones and vegetable scraps so that she turns waste into fertilizer for the garden. The demon lord is truly touched, thanks her for making sure nothing was wasted. Nomi feels that she is fine. When they use a press to shape pots, they squeeze them so quickly that there is enough for everyone. She gazes at the mountains, only hoping that the warm dish will be enough to lift everyone's spirits in the camp. Returning to the office, the demon lord finishes the meal and simply sinks into the chair, calling it pure bliss. Nomi says she is just glad it hit the mark and offers to pour some tea, while the lord apologizes for all the extra work. Nomi says that despite all efforts, the dish turned out truly incredibly tasty. The demon lord fully agrees, the taste is simply captivating, and Nomi explains further, this is essentially the masterpiece of the head chef. She says they take a bunch of quality pork bones and boil them for eternity until it becomes The demon mistress admits that she is not very knowledgeable about cooking, yet despite this, she tells Nomi how sincerely grateful she is for the food while she looks into her cup and thinks about how much time has passed since after such a meal she managed to sit quietly and truly enjoy the tea. Nomi says there is nothing better than warm food to set the mood. The demon mistress nods and seems to feel the strength returning to her. Nomi notices the changes and tells the demon lord that her face now looks much better than before. He is surprised and asks if it is true that she has become so much healthier. She admits that she honestly cannot tell just by looking at herself, but Nomi definitely noticed the changes because Lately, she flies through her mountain of papers much faster than usual. She recalls how Nomi once told her that her brain will not work properly if she does not get enough rest. Looking back, she realizes Nomi was right, especially since she already. After the day she received that day and night lantern, she sleeps perfectly like a baby because that lantern gives some real darkness in the room. The demon lord bursts with excitement, sharply points a finger at Nomi and shouts that she is 100 right about Yumero. Nomi just grimaces at that sudden energy while the Lord talks about what an amazing new setup it is, she beams. It turns out it produces far more nightmares than the dream pillow they used before, and because of this Nomi can barely keep herself together. She looks completely exhausted. She stares blankly into space and wonders if the demon lord can find even a little real rest with all those monsters in her head. A mischievous spark flashes in her eyes, and she says that she actually hasn't tried the one made from Garma's fur yet. She decides that today is the perfect moment for a test run and says she sincerely can't wait to see how it goes. Nomi doesn't quite know how to react, so she gives a somewhat awkward and trembling reply so the conversation doesn't hang in the air. Looking at the tea set, she tries to convince herself, as long as the demon lord considers these nightmares good dreams, everything must be fine. The demon lord heads for the exit and, walking to the door, tells Nomi that he leaves the rest of the work to her. Nomi stretches her arms out to the sides and lets out a long sigh, finally feeling the weight of the day fall on her as soon as she is alone. She returns to work and runs her finger along the list, checking that all deliveries and inventory management are in order.